The main character, Christopher, always thought that everyone has a talent. He just hasn't found his yet. Those around him called him an F-rank piece of shit, telling him to know his place. The girl suggested breaking up. The world didn't give a single chance to losers like him. But Christopher was not discouraged and believed that the only thing better than talent was connections. All 990,000 of his past lives were watching him. He had mastered the shield, fencing, singing, and a beautiful physique. All of this was in his past lives. And so the wretched F-rank hunter Christopher woke up for the 990,000th time and decided to act. His adventure begins right now, and he rushes into battle. All the participants died except him, and he, an F-rank hunter, was the only survivor surrounded by high-ranking monsters. He didn't see the exit from the dungeon, and the entrance suddenly closed. But Christopher didn't want to die here senselessly like that. He thought that if he had superpowers, he would have at least some chance. And then he heard a voice that his past life had gotten out of control and had intervened in the situation on its own. It was Miller, the sword's last patron, who descended upon Christopher as if in a dream, and one of his past lives entered his body. At that moment, a man woke him up. He yelled at him that he had escaped while they were clearing the dungeon, and then he just fell asleep. It was the squad leader. He said they didn't have any extra money to pay idiots like Christopher. The hero was wounded in the dungeon, and he came out of there and drank all their potions, which were very expensive. Anyway, the boss ordered him to get out, saying that he wouldn't pay him anything and called him not an F-ranked hunter, but an F-retarded hunter. Christopher justified himself by saying that his boss ordered him to provoke the monsters, and maybe he didn't do everything right, but not paying him was illegal. Anyway, Christopher was kicked out of the team in disgrace, and they said that he should be grateful that they saved his life, and if something didn't suit his stupid self, he could contact the association. The boss remembered Christopher asking him at the interview to hire him and give him a chance to prove himself. And now he was kicked out in disgrace. The world turned into a place filled with dungeons and monsters, and everyone who had awakened their talent became a dungeon-clearing hunter. Based on their ability level, they were assigned ranks. Christopher is an F-rank hunter, in a world where rank is everything, and he was already used to being treated like trash. His hero had one outlet, one joy in this world: his beloved girl, Elizabeth. He endured all the trials with ease because his Elizabeth was next to him, and he hurried to meet her. Having met in the cafe, he was very glad to see her. Elizabeth had been very busy lately and had no time for meetings, and then she suddenly announced that it was time for them to part ways. She explained her actions by saying that a year ago they were both F rank. Now she is C rank, but he is still F. She tried and worked very hard this year, and he turned out to be a failure. Elizabeth called him untalented and too pathetic. She can't stay with him anymore. She asked him not to call her anymore and left. Christopher was at the brink of despair. Everyone saw him as a loser, a mediocrity, and a weakling. He wrote to his best friend Thomas in the hope that he would come and support him. His friend did not take long to come. He was glad to meet him. Christopher told him how much had fallen on him. He was sitting on the bank of the river, and Thomas thought that he wanted to drown himself and said that the water was very cold. Christopher said that he didn't even have the strength for it, and complained that he was so poor that he couldn't buy food for himself. Thomas went to the convenience store to buy food and drink for his friend. Christopher was sitting on a bench near the river, and suddenly a man approached him. He said that despite the fact that Christopher is a rank F hunter, he sees great potential in him. The hero asked how the man knew about his rank, but he replied that it didn't matter, and asked if Christopher believed in past lives. The man sensed the past lives of great people inside Christopher, and these aren't just past lives. They have the status of the strongest, and Christopher shouldn't have any problems with strength. The man said that he still sees them all next to the guy, and if he doesn't believe him, He'll soon see for himself." And he left. Christopher sat there stunned and couldn't understand what was happening. Suddenly his friend sat down next to him and called out to him. The hero was scared. Thomas bought them drinks and asked who the guy was, but Christopher didn't know. And he asked if his friend believed in past lives. He replied that his friend was talking nonsense. But Christopher clearly heard a voice that said that he now knew about the existence of past lives, and they were watching him. The hero asked Thomas if he had heard the pompous voice. The friend was surprised and answered that he had not. Christopher asked Thomas if he had found out about working as a porter in the squad, as he had requested. The hero said that he was ready to do any job, since he needed to pay rent and have something to eat. Thomas replied that he had one squad in mind, but the people there weren't very friendly. But Christopher didn't care, if only he got paid. And he thought how good it was to have a friend working in the dungeon administration. The friends were already quite drunk, and quietly made their way to Christopher's house. Thomas sent his friend to open the door and go home, but he didn't want to. And Thomas objected that Christopher had to work the next day, and he had wasted too much time on him. And he left. His friend thanked him and began to open the door. Christopher thought that he might have only one friend, but he would be the best one, and he must give his all to succeed and repay Thomas. At that moment he opened the door of the apartment and entered it, but suddenly it was illuminated by a bright light, and Christopher did not understand where he was. And then a ghost knight in armor appeared. He said that they had finally met. The hero did not understand anything and asked who he was and how he knew his name. He said his name was Corsago, the shield of justice protecting the northern kingdom, and he was his past life. Christopher had no idea what was going on. He remembered the words the man had spoken to him in the park by the river. Corsago had said that he would instill his will into him, even if his body was torn to pieces by a spear 1,000 times. He also assured them that he would not allow their honor to be tarnished, that they could not be such a weak-willed weakling. And suddenly, with all his anger, he thrust his spear into Christopher. Corsago was outraged by the hero's weakness and the fact that he gave in so easily and writhed from one blow. Christopher realized that he was safe, unwounded, although he thought he was bleeding. Corsago said that he would not die, even if he wanted to, until he allowed him to, and the hero thought that he would be tortured here forever. Seeing the door, he decided to make an attempt to escape. But the door did not open. The knight continued to humiliate him, saying that he was a completely weak-willed weakling and not worthy of being filled. And then Christopher got furious and replied that he didn't know anything about him. And how could he tell him such things and yell at him? And Corsago was surprised. He finally saw the fire in the hero's eyes. And he said that as a past life, he must give Christopher his will, so that no one can take anything away from him anymore, and he must climb to the very top. All the past lives wished him well and success. Corsago said that without trials and tribulations, Christopher would achieve nothing. Therefore, in order to gain strength and face destiny, he must fight the knight. Although Christopher did not fully believe in what was happening and did not trust Corsago, he decided to fight in the hope of gaining strength. He took the shield, and the knight said that he could use the technique to repel his attack, and he struck with the spear. Christopher failed to parry the attack. He didn't even have time to see the spear. He tried again and again. The knight struck. The hero thought he would succeed at least the 50th time, but he didn't succeed even the 100th. He was on the verge of death, and even after 2,500 spear stabs, Christopher couldn't do anything. Corsago said that he was weak, and therefore would kill him, and dealt a powerful blow. But the hero suddenly blocked it with his shield. The knight praised him, saying that he was now ready, and that he had instilled in him the technique of 24 spears and the ability to understand the enemy's attacks. He won't explain to Christopher what this means now. His body will remember everything anyway. And when he wakes up from this dream, everything will change. Christopher was woken up by the phone. It was Thomas, asking about his hangover. He was calling about work and asking if his friend had changed his mind, since it was a C-rank dungeon. Christopher said it didn't matter because he needed the money and decided to go there right away. He remembered the dream he had of being pierced by a spear, but there were no wounds on him, but he could still feel it inside. It was all so real. And was it a dream? It was a good thing the dungeon was a 10-minute walk from the house. Christopher was about to leave, and then he noticed his shield against the wall. He got it when he registered for work as a hunter. The hero hadn't seen it for a long time. Had it really been standing here all this time? Christopher remembered how in his dream, Corsago told him to take the shield and repel the attack, and he decided to take the shield with him. He arrived at the dungeon first. There was no one else, and then Elizabeth appeared. She asked Christopher why he was there and why he was following her. Another guy in armor came up with her. His name was Eric, and he asked why Christopher had brought his shield. And how is he going to carry the mana crystals now, carrying such a heavy weight on his back? The hero apologized, justifying himself by saying that this was his first time working as a porter. They approached the door to the dungeon with the team. They opened it, and Christopher felt the same feeling as last night in his dream, when he opened the door to his apartment. But this feeling was weaker, and he felt the desire to kill. As soon as they opened the door, they immediately felt a direct blow. Christopher managed to get his bearings and blocked the blow with his shield. The team thought he was dead, as it was a direct hit, but the hero was unharmed and asked why they were attacked as soon as they entered. Fearing a second attack, they lined up and prepared. They were attacked by skeleton knights. The team defended themselves with everything they could. When everything calmed down, they gathered their thoughts. Most of their team was dead. Skeleton knights should be in B-rank dungeons. The administration must have made a mistake. This is most likely an elite dungeon, the rank of which is higher than C. The rapist was able to miraculously dodge the attack, but with such forces, they cannot go further. Christopher said that they had better go back. Let them be punished. But it is better than dying. The hero was saved by a mysterious voice, and it is not a fact that it will happen next time. He turned to the door to open it, but it wouldn't open. The door was locked. The team realized they were trapped. It was a dungeon with a door that locked after entering, and they had no choice but to clear it out. Elizabeth became scared, but Eric told her not to be afraid. He would protect her. And Christopher realized that this was her new boyfriend. They decided to clear the dungeon and prepared for a possible attack. It didn't take long for a skeleton sergeant to appear out of nowhere and slit the throat of one of the team. Elizabeth screamed that they would all die here, and Christopher realized that he could defend himself. The skeletons were attacking, and he was able to calculate their movements to dodge the attack. At first he dodged, but then he realized that the skeleton was weak, and he punched it right in the bull's eye. Christopher realized that he could kill them, and he began to use his abilities. The battle was going on. When everything went quiet, Elizabeth stood behind the hero and was in shock. She asked how he, an F-rank hunter, was able to kill all the skeletons and what was going on. Christopher replied that she should just be glad that she was alive and asked how the others were. She replied that they were dead, and that only the two of them survived. And then Elizabeth said that she shouldn't have been so harsh with him, and asked if he would leave her, because they loved each other. Christopher replied that he wouldn't leave her, but he thought that she always thought only of herself. The girl, meanwhile, thought that she would use him to get out of here. They went forward and came up against the doors. They didn't know what was behind them. Maybe it was the exit. The hero carefully opened the door. It was quiet there, and ahead lay a bridge over some lake. Elizabeth told Christopher to go first, and she would back him up, but she thought the bridge was unsafe and she was using him as bait. Christopher went ahead, and, making sure that everything was calm, called Elizabeth to follow him. She decided to stick with him in order to get out of here alive. The girl thought that she needed his shield to defend herself, and she followed him across the bridge. And she thought that as soon as she crossed the bridge, she would take the shield from him. But then suddenly a huge shark emerged from under the bridge and instantly grabbed Elizabeth. Christopher rushed to her aid, but the shark dragged her under the water. He felt very sorry for her. But then Corsago and Miller's past lives told him that emotional stability was the key to success, and he wouldn't get out of here if he was so sensitive. He walked across the bridge and found himself at the door. He carefully opened it, and then the voice of Andrew, his past life, told him that he is still so innocent, and it will be very funny to spoil him, but now he is forced to leave the hero. And Christopher woke up, not understanding where he was and where Elizabeth had disappeared to. He reached the exit door, but it was closed. The hero turned around and saw a multitude of skeleton knights coming towards him. He had a sword in his hand and had no choice but to fight to survive. He parried the attack and was thrown back against the wall. He didn't understand how it could have come to this. The entrance to the dungeon was closed, and there was no way out. And how did he remain the only survivor, since he is a rank F hunter? And what are these high-level monsters doing in this dungeon? And he thought that if he had that power, he would have dealt with them. And then he heard a voice that his past life, seeing his thirst for life, had intervened in the situation on its own. It was Miller, the sword's last patron, who entered Christopher's body, and he began to fight. But suddenly, he left the body with the words, "See you later," and Christopher fell unconscious on the floor. Miller was called to a past life council. They sat at the table and asked Miller why he decided to go, since it was someone else's turn. He replied that the situation was critical, and there was no time to think. Corsago claimed that he was the only one he needed now. It is very important to train, and the hero will never grow if they help him all the time. And at that moment, the singer Angela responded. She asked if she could go. She really wants their reincarnation to hear her singing. She doubted Christopher had a chance. She suggested that everyone just calm down and sing. Brown said that they still need to give this reincarnation a chance, otherwise they will have 1,000,000 more reincarnations. The male fighters were deciding who would go there. Angela, seeing them in confusion, decided to take advantage of the situation. While they were deciding, she would already have time to go and come back and went to the door. But Corsago abruptly pulled her back and said that it was his turn now, and went out the door, flooded with bright light. Christopher found himself again in a place unknown to him. Corsago looked down on him and greeted his reincarnation. The hero asked what was going on, but the knight told him that he was asking the wrong questions and that it would be better to ask what he should do. And he said that Christopher should become stronger than anyone in this world. The hero justified himself by saying that he only had an F rank and he couldn't do anything, although he became stronger after training. Corsago said to watch very carefully, and with his sword he cut the sky, and a crystal appeared from there. Christopher thought it was a mana crystal. The knight said that this is the core of monsters, and people in Christopher's world use it as fuel. But you can do other things with it, and Corsago activated the crystal with his hand, and it turned into a huge troll. The knight told Christopher to take his shield. This would be his training, and at that moment the troll rushed at the hero. He tried to defend himself, but he couldn't. The troll struck one after another. Corsago objected that if that were the case, Christopher would have died 80 times already. The hero reasoned that to attack with a shield, he would need a large swing, and it would be difficult for him to even wound the troll. He was in a hopeless situation. Christopher understood that the troll was very strong, and if he did not kill him with one blow, he was dead. The monster constantly changed its tactics and trajectory. The hero gathered all his strength into one blow and rushed into the attack. He swung his shield and jumped and hit the troll with it. The monster was stunned. He had succeeded. Corsago was pleased. Christopher asked with his last strength why he was helping him. The knight answered that he would soon understand everything, and the hero lost consciousness. He came to in some cave. Christopher was safe and sound after such beatings. He saw a skeleton's mana crystal lying nearby and picked it up, deciding that he could get a large sum for it. He was completely confused about what was happening to him, but he understood that first he needed to get out of here alive. The hero saw a door that looked like the entrance to the boss's room, and he went there. It was like a palace inside, beautiful and clean. He walked down the corridor and heard a strange noise. The skeleton champion appeared before him. He was huge and armored. He held a club in his hands. Christopher realized that the administration had definitely screwed up when it came to assessing this dungeon. He grabbed the shield and stood in defense, and wondered if he could handle it. And then he heard a voice asking why reincarnation still doubted itself. Stop being afraid. Never doubt your power again. Corsago's defense was activated at full power, and Christopher rushed at the skeletal champion. The attack was unsuccessful, and he realized that it was useless to fight him closely, and that he needed to keep his distance so that he would open up. The skeleton's attack radius was huge. The hero defended himself, but he was very strong. Christopher's mana was running low. He could only take a couple of hits, and the skeleton champion rushed at him. Each of his attacks was deadly, but Christopher managed to dodge them. The hero concentrated, gathered all his strength and struck. He killed the skeleton champion. It was all over. Meanwhile, an employee of the dungeon administration was on duty in the area of the dungeon. He informed the administration by phone that 3 days had already passed since the doors of the dungeon were opened. But there was no news about the cleanup, and no one came out of the dungeon. Therefore, all the members of the squad died. If this is so, then the monsters can come out and ordered to prepare everything for the siege of this dungeon. A rapid response team was sent to the worker. But then someone appeared at the exit. It was Christopher, and he had cleared the dungeon. The worker asked him where the rest of the team was. The hero replied that they were all dead. The man asked him to show his ID, introducing himself as an employee of the dungeon administration. And Christopher showed him his F-rank hunter ID. The employee was shocked. He burst into the dungeon manager's office, not letting him eat his donut. The worker informed the boss that most likely a hunter had appeared and was able to awaken again. The manager was surprised and wanted to make sure. The employee showed him Christopher's ID, and he reported that he was an F-rank hunter, the only one who returned alive from the B-rank elite dungeon. The chief was indignant that the hunter could barely stand on his feet, and how could it be said that he had woken up a second time? To be sure of this, we need to conduct research. After all, even among S-rank hunters, only a few could awaken a second time. And he ordered his subordinate to return to work. But he was indignant and proved his case. The boss said that he knew how much a second awakening cost, and he needed to take responsibility for his words. The employee, angry and having proved nothing to the manager, left the office and decided to do everything himself. Christopher was lying at home. He was very tired and needed to rest. He was happy that he had survived, but he had no strength at all. He needed to sleep. And again he was visited by a strange feeling, and he heard a voice. Again, Christopher thought, but it was not Corsago, but Brown, his other past life. Brown tried to introduce himself and said that Christopher could have died, but the hero rudely said that he already knew that. The past life found this funny, and noticed that his reincarnation was very brave. And he understood why Carsago was so interested in Christopher. It seemed that it was not for nothing that he had come here today instead of Miller. Brown said he chose the shortest route to meet him, because all the other lives wanted to see him first. But when Christopher faces the coming dangers, Brown will prove that he is the one who will be useful to him. And he began his lesson. He said that he would aim for the hero's heart, and as soon as he dodged his attack even once, the lesson would be over. Brown was curious to see how many times he would die, but Christopher dodged the first attack, and the teacher said that the stronger the hero becomes, the more vile actions he will be caught doing. For example, the director of the Shadow Guild. In the morning, Christopher went to the pawn shop with the desire to get some money. There was a girl sitting in the office who kindly asked what brought the guy to them. Christopher replied that he would like to sell the mana crystals and assess the value of his shield. The girl said that the mana crystals were worth about 20 million won, and the appraisal was worth 1 million won. She asked him for his hunting license and said that all the appraisers were busy and that they had to wait a little, and invited him to sit down. While the hero was waiting, the girl called someone on the phone and said that the surviving hunter they were talking about was here. At this time, the guild director Jacob was sitting in his office and was worried that Elizabeth had not answered him for a long time. He ordered his assistant to find out what was going on with the dungeon she had gone to, and he started calling the dungeon administration. When he found out everything, he reported to the director that all the hunters who entered the dungeon died. The director was shocked, but a subordinate reported that there was one survivor left, and Jacob ordered that he be brought to him immediately. Christopher was sitting on the couch in the pawn shop, and then the same dungeon administration employee approached him. He suggested the hero to take a walk to another place and talk, to tell him something important. The worker questioned Christopher, saying that at this point they would end their investigation, and he handed the hero a certificate in his name as a C-rank hunter, saying that he was much stronger, but that was all he could do for him for now. Christopher thanked him and said that was enough for now. In the evening, the hero went to a cafe to meet his best friend Thomas. The friend congratulated Christopher on his promotion. The guy was surprised how Thomas knew, since he didn't work in the hunter's department, but he replied that he was quite famous in the dungeon administration. Everyone is talking about the only surviving F-rank porter in the C-rank elite dungeon. Christopher wondered why and what was wrong with it. Thomas wondered that his friend didn't know, and told him. There was another case similar to yours. This happens extremely rarely, and only with awakened hunters. The most famous of them is the SS-ranked hunter Mason. He founded the country's supreme guild called ASURA. Mason was the only survivor in the dungeon, recognized as an awakened hunter. He is the first and only SS-rank hunter in their country, which helped the guild gain fame. The Asura Guild is now called the Diamond Layer, and Mason himself is quite a nasty character. And Thomas asked if the guild administration had contacted Christopher, and if he had received a special job offer. The hero replied that they had not. The manager at the Hunters Department is a bastard. Usually someone like Christopher gets the message from them. A friend said that promotion to C rank was ridiculous. Mason was immediately promoted to A rank, and Christopher had already suffered a lot in life because he was an orphan. And the hero asked his friend to end the conversation here and move on to another topic. Then they left the cafe, and Christopher put the drunk Thomas in a taxi and sent him home. His friend patted him on the shoulder one last time and said that everything would be fine now and left. The hero realized that he also needed to rest and headed home. But he noticed that two men were following him, and he told them to stop hiding and let them show themselves. It was the assistant director of the guild with a colleague. He told Christopher that he should go with them. The hero objected. Why would he do that? And the assistant began to threaten him with force. But the boy called them bastards and got furious, saying that they made a mistake. Brown possessed him. A colleague attacked Christopher from behind and was sure he had injured him, but received no retaliation. He repeated the blow, but again felt nothing. This was Christopher using the aura as a reflection of himself, and he himself stood aside. The assistant director was confused as to how he knew how to use aura, since he was only an F rank. Christopher eliminated the attacker, took the knife from him, saying he would lend it to him for a while, and headed to the assistant director. He thought he was stronger than Christopher, since he only had an F rank, but the hero turned out to be very fast, easily dodging attacks, and struck at the painful points. The assistant was amazed. Christopher asked him who sent him, but he refused to answer and demanded to kill him, since he would not say anything anyway. With one movement of the knife, the hero destroyed the assistant. Easy, Christopher thought, and the darkness cleared away all the evidence behind him. The hero came to his senses standing in front of his apartment door. He thought that he shouldn't have drunk. He didn't even remember how he got home. He went in and lay down on the bed, deciding that if he was home safe and sound, then everything was fine. Christopher was very tired and went to bed. In the morning, he was woken up by a phone call. Thomas asked how his hangover was and said that he had found him a group, and he must come as soon as possible. Christopher got dressed quickly, ran out into the street, caught a taxi, and drove to his destination. Suddenly, there was a flash, fire, a bang, and the car crashed into a pole. Christopher was thrown out of the car and fell to the ground, where he saw an orc sorcerer nearby. He was throwing fireballs. The hero thought, "This can't be. How is this possible, or did a gate open somewhere?" There were many orcs. They were saying and shouting something in their own language. Christopher knew that at this rate he would be late for the meeting. It was necessary to deal with them urgently. But there were an infinite number of orcs. The hero decided to deal with their leader, so as not to waste time on each fry. He rushed through the crowd of monsters in a flash, and saw the leader. He dealt a powerful blow, and he was finished. The people running from the scene stopped and looked at him in surprise. And then Christopher heard the girl's voice. She said that it was quite good, and why he wasn't in any guild. His abilities were too good to waste. A pretty, slender girl said she had little time and invited him to join their guild. She handed Christopher a business card, told him to call her if she decided to do it, and rushed away. The hero tried to stop her, but in vain. He looked at the business card. It was the very famous Lace Guild. And then people started running out of the mall in panic, screaming for help. Christopher realized that monsters had appeared there too. The hunter's rules stated that all hunters were required to intervene if a gate opened. The hero decided that fighting all this evil was too risky. But on the other hand, if he beats them, he will be promoted to A rank. And Christopher went to the mall, but inside it was empty. There was not a single orc, and this made him very wary. It was clean, and all the corpses had been removed. A wounded man approached him and asked if he was a hunter, and advised him to leave quickly, as it was very dangerous here. The man said that this opening of the gate was strange and unusual, and that someone was definitely involved in it. At that moment, a crowd of guys in masks approached them. Christopher asked who they were and who had sent them. They said it made no difference because he was going to die. The man asked the guys in masks if they were from the Echo Guild. They reasoned among themselves that they were even recognized, so they needed to be killed quickly. And one of the guys rushed to fight Christopher. The hero started using aura, and the guy realized that he was not so simple. The enemy struck blow after blow, but Christopher confidently dodged them. It was clear that these guys had killed before. One couldn't cope with the hero, and the second came to his aid. Christopher destroyed them all. The last one remained. The guy jumped on the hero, but he cut him with his sword. The wounded man was in shock that Christopher had single-handedly dealt with the special forces, and he asked the hero if he was an A-rank hunter. He replied that it didn't matter, and then the man asked his name. The hero replied that his name was Christopher, and that it was time for him to go. But the man urged him to wait and said, even though he doesn't look so good right now, he is the head of the guild department, and he promised to personally make sure Christopher was awarded, and asked him to come see them sometime. He replied that he would think about it, and the head of the department said that his name was Darren. The next day, the hero thought that since he had been promised a reward, there was no need to refuse, and went to the head of the department. He walked up to the guild office and dialed Darren on the phone. He immediately recognized Christopher by his voice and suggested having breakfast together. They went into a cafe. They got to know each other better, talked. Darren asked if he wanted anything else. Christopher said that was enough. After the meal, he handed the hero a gift. It was a special type of spatial bag. Christopher thought it was a very valuable gift. And how can a bronze guild give such valuable things to an ordinary person? But Darren said that they noticed his abilities and asked the hero to help him and the guild. Christopher countered that he was only a C-rank hunter. But the department head said it didn't matter, since he had already proven his worth. That's why he asked him for help from the Lace Guild. And then Christopher heard a voice that was different from those he had heard before. It was the smell of death, and it told the hero to fulfill Darren's request. The leader began to lay out his problem. Most likely, they are about to have an unofficial war with the Echo Guild, and they need help. Christopher thought that he would be rewarded again later, and that it was worth accepting his offer, but he decided to drag out the time. And he said that the space bag is great, but he is putting his life on the line, and he refuses the offer. Darren was upset, but suggested to Christopher that he could call on their squad for help at any time. The hero was very flattered by this, and he agreed to help the guild. Christopher wanted to enter the C-rank dungeon, but the receptionist told him that it would be difficult to get in due to the long waiting list. The hero asked to go to a higher-ranked dungeon, and the girl replied that he would need to be an A-rank hunter or part of a professional group to do so. Christopher decided to contact the Lace Guild to join the group. When he met that girl from the guild, she was very happy, saying that she had been waiting for him. Her name was Catherine. The hero asked if they had a schedule for professional group raids, and the girl replied that they were planning a raid on a B-rank dungeon, and invited him to join. They leave tomorrow. The next day, a car came to pick Christopher up at the appointed place. The driver invited him into the car, saying that they were waiting for him. Catherine was sitting in the car. They arrived by car to the dungeon, where a professional group was located. Among them was the A-rank hunter Dylan, who used magic. When he saw Catherine, he rushed to embrace her. He was happy to see her. The girl introduced Christopher to Dylan, and he replied that Catherine had told him a lot about the hero. He walked up to Christopher, shook his hand, and introduced himself. He was the leader of the professional group Lace. The leader asked if Christopher wanted to join their team. The hero wanted to answer no, but they didn't hear him. Catherine was discussing with Dylan that they should try to get Christopher to join their guild, and they were goofing around and making bets. The hero decided that they were crazy. At that moment, one of the team members approached Christopher and called him. The man said that in B-rank dungeons it is ineffective to use regular weapons, and he lent Christopher a special sword for a while. The hero thanked the man, but asked why they were so kind, and he replied that they had taken the order and were now one team. Dylan gave the briefing and explained the formation. Christopher's place was in the rear, behind Catherine. So he was her bodyguard? The leader gave the command to obey his orders, and opened the portal entrance to the B-rank dungeon with magic. When they entered, the team began clearing the dungeon. They were attacked by spirit sphere monsters. Dylan used his magic power and destroyed the monster with one blow. The monsters got angry and rushed at the team. The group formed up and charged into battle. Christopher was shocked by what was happening. This is what a pro-class team means. It was incredible. He didn't expect them to be so good. The leader said that it was a small dungeon, and they just needed to move forward. They had destroyed all the monsters here, but the boss would be much more difficult to deal with. They went deeper into the dungeon, but it was suspiciously quiet there. And suddenly, the nightmares flew out at them. There were 12 of them. Even though they were only B rank, there were a lot of them. The hunters were fighting and were already tired. Christopher could not stand it and rushed into battle. The leader yelled at him not to break formation, but the hero said that now was not the time to form up, and Dylan volunteered to help him. Christopher asked to cover him and began the battle. Thus, they destroyed all the monsters. But there was still a boss ahead. He did not keep us waiting long, and he rushed at the team. The hero reacted quickly and blocked the blow with his shield. It was an aura shield. The force of the blocking injured his arm, and then his life helped him again. His strength and recovery abilities increased. His hand immediately healed, and he felt a huge power in himself. And then he continued the battle. Catherine covered him. Her strength would have been enough for another 5 minutes. The boss was very strong, and Christopher had to stop mining mana crystals and strike at the core itself. He found it and drove his sword into the core. The boss was killed. Dylan looked and realized that this was an awakened hunter. He really wanted him to join their team. One of the hunters was earlier. The participants began to help him, saying that everything was already over. And Christopher decided to leave quickly, taking advantage of the situation. So that he wouldn't be forced to join the guild, he said goodbye to Dylan, saying that he would see him again, and asked him to make sure that he would be paid for everything. Christopher was lying on his bed at home, and he received a message about a payment of 50 million. It was much more than he expected. The hero was very tired and fell asleep. He found himself in a large room, like a castle, and in the middle of the room was a sword. And a voice told him that the last holy sword was waiting for him, and told him to take this sword. It was beautiful. Christopher came and took it. And then Miller, his past life, appeared. The hero felt its energy and understood when it entered him. Miller said the guy can use the sword's aura, like the time he possessed Christopher, ordered him to remember this feeling and form a flow of energy right now. The hero tried and succeeded. Christopher said that it doesn't feel like a shield and that it's harder for him to control this aura. Miller decided to help the guy. He put his hand on his back and helped him form a flow by passing it through the hero, and told him to remember the flow of his magic. Christopher felt sick. Miller said not to resist, but to accept him. It was a magical resonance, and in reality, Christopher would have died already. But the hero did not stop and asked to repeat. They tried, and everything worked out. Miller noticed that the guy was not bad, and could even become a master of using the sword's aura. Then the past life demonstrated all the capabilities of the sword. Christopher watched carefully. He had handled Karsago's training, so he assured me he could handle this one too. He tried a few tricks, and everything worked out. But the guy was very tired, and Miller said that on this note they would end the training, and if Christopher was ready, they would meet again. The hero walked out through the glowing door, and Miller thought that maybe this time everything would work out. The next day, Christopher went to the clearing to practice controlling the sword's aura. The unofficial guild war is coming soon, and he needs to prepare and continue training. This is the only way he can become stronger. And then, the day of the unofficial war arrived. Christopher sat in the car with Darren and asked what their forces were. The leader replied that they had 2 B-rank hunters, including him, and 4 C-rank hunters. Based on the scouts' reports, they don't stand a chance against the Echo Guild. Without Christopher's help, they can't cope. The guild is in a difficult situation. All they can do is trust him completely. They got out of the car, everything was quiet, and Christopher realized that they had been ambushed. It all looked like a performance. The guild was assembled, and they set off for the point where the war began. But the hero decided to first get rid of those who were waiting in ambush. He suddenly rushed towards the ambush. There were two of them, and Christopher finished them off with one blow. The group members were happy with his skills, hoping for salvation. The head of the Echo Guild was watching all this, and he realized that the Lace Guild had hired a mercenary. But this would not help them. He sent 2 guild members to attack, ordering them to kill everyone. But seeing that it would not work, he decided to do everything himself. Christopher saw that the commander himself was entering the battle and decided that he needed to get rid of the leader, and the rest would be easy, and he rushed to attack the leader. As expected, he was different from ordinary soldiers, but at the same time, the guild leader was surprised by the mercenaries' level. The guild members were amazed at their capabilities when they saw them fight. But Guildmaster Echo ordered his men to continue fighting, because without a mercenary, the Lace Guild is nothing, and he can handle a mercenary. And then, out of nowhere, a fireball flew at Christopher. He managed to reflect it with his shield, but was distracted, and then the head of the guild jumped on him from above with a sword. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the entire Lace Guild had already been killed, and the Echo Guild commander ordered Christopher to surrender because they had lost, and thus save his life. But the hero gathered himself into a fist and began to strike. The head of the guild ordered his subordinates to destroy him. Since he refused to save his life, he was asking for it. Christopher fought alone against everyone. His mana was running out. He called upon his past lives to help him, but no one answered. The members of the enemy guild decided that he had gone crazy, and they said that no one would help him. After all, it was not by chance that they chose this place. Christopher had a cry of despair and asked Corsago and Miller to help him, and then he appeared. The Reaper. He said that Christopher's cry could be heard in hell, and instilled in the hero a desire for blood, to kill and destroy. Ordered them all to be killed to give him a chance to hear a farewell cry. The hero's mana was restored, the sword's aura turned red, and he rushed into battle. The sweet smell of blood excited the Reaper. The awakened instinct made him a killer, thirsty for blood. He showed Christopher the enemy's weak points and ordered him to kill them. And he set to work. Only 2 opponents remained. They were strong. One of them ran towards Christopher and grabbed the sword with his hands, shouting that he would break it in half. But Christopher pierced him with his sword, saying that it was not that simple. You can't slash an aura sword with your bare hands. Guildmaster Echo rushed to help. While the sword was busy, he attacked the hero from the left. But he screwed up. Christopher still had a shield. With one blow of his shield, he threw the head back to the tree. He was barely alive. There was no one left to fight with. Christopher decided it was time to leave, but according to the rules of the unofficial war, it would last until one side was destroyed. He had to kill them all. But the surviving leader no longer had the will to fight. The Reaper ordered his throat to be cut. Christopher didn't want to do it, but he swung his sword and finished off the Echo Guild. The surviving head of the department, Lays, approached him. Darren thanked the hero and noted that he had no idea how strong Christopher was. The chief said that 6 of them survived, and he said that there is no need to regret what he killed, because there are people who are alive thanks to him. And since the Echo Guild was destroyed, the payment for the work was transferred to his account. Christopher said that he would never do something so dangerous again. Checked the account, and he received 150 million. Holy shit. Meanwhile, a subordinate entered the director's office and reported that he could not contact the Echo Guild team. The director became furious, saying that even though they had not sent their best people, they could not all have disappeared. The subordinate reported that they had been defeated by a mercenary, and the director demanded to get his name right away. They didn't want to disappoint their patron, and they needed to take good care of him. Christopher was resting on his bed at home and thinking that he had received 150 million from one guild war. But for this amount, he had risked his life. But if it's for the orphanage where he grew up, then for them he's capable of even more. Christopher bought some gifts and went to the orphanage. He knocked on the director's door, entered, but the director was not there, and Adelina was standing in the office. The guy was glad to see her and asked where the director was. She replied that the director had not been feeling very well lately. She is getting worse because she is not getting any younger, and the girl is helping her. And then the director came in and said that she is very healthy. And she told Adelina that she should work as a supportive hunter, and not worry about her, and not tell her how to live. The director asked Christopher if he was okay. He replied that he was fine, and asked the woman to take care of herself. The hero asked Adelina how she managed to combine work and helping the shelter. It was hard, but she replied that she did what she liked. The director looked at the huge box and told Christopher that there was no point in bringing anything and why so much. He replied that they were snacks and gifts for the children. She said that the guy had overdone it again. Adelina asked him what money he was using to buy such gifts. Christopher replied that he had been promoted to C rank and given a generous payment. The director said she was very proud of him, and he replied that he was just lucky. And the woman asked if he was doing anything dangerous. Christopher said that of course not, and that he did not do anything like that. And he and Adelina went out to the street to the children to give them presents. And the director thought that once he was just a baby, and now he is such a grown man. The children were playing in the yard of the orphanage. They saw Christopher and joyfully rushed to meet him. And they began to demand gifts faster. The hero noticed that they seemed to be happier with the toys than with him, but the children said that this was not so and rushed to hug him. The principal came out into the yard and told the children that Christopher had brought pizza, and they all rushed inside to eat pizza. The guy realized that he had lost to pizza, and he and Adelina went to eat too. The children ate with pleasure, saying that it was very tasty. And Christopher told them not to hurry, and if there was not enough, he would bring more. At that moment, a bright light flashed outside the window, and someone launched a fiery strike. Christopher ordered all the children to hide under the table and blocked the strike with his shield. Adelina was a C-rank hunter and offered to help, but Christopher told her to take care of the children. He was the only one who could protect everyone. The guys entered the room. They were surprised that Christopher was using aura. One of them said he thought the intelligence core was wrong, but he was wrong. And apparently, the hero is at least B rank. They surrounded Christopher. They sent 20 men to capture him. One of them told the hero that he had chosen the wrong opponent, and their boss wanted his head. Christopher said that he had enough of this nonsense and was ready to fight them all. And he gave the order to his boys to attack. They used acceleration, fireball, cleave, but Christopher reflected all the attacks. They could do nothing. Then the leader of the opponents ordered to attack the girl and the children. And the hero understood that he wouldn't have time, and he threw his shield in front of the children, and it began to reflect attacks from them with its aura. He lost his shield, and the enemy was glad that he had nothing to repel attacks with, and this was their chance. They attacked him again, but Christopher handled the sword skillfully and laid down 9 men. There were 11 left. The hero thought he couldn't defeat them all. And then he summoned Reaper the Reaper. Reaper's insidious essence was awakened, and some of the lust for murder was released. The opponents were bound by some bloody threads, by their hands and heads. They could not understand what it was. Christopher was exhausted. The leader of the opponents struck him, and he fell. Adelina ran to him shouting, "Get up," and said that he cannot die. She used her talent, healing magic, to revive him. But the magic didn't work. Christopher was losing consciousness and whispered that he felt weak. And then he heard a voice. It called him to fight for those dear to him, and not to do anything he would regret later. And it would give him strength. Christopher found himself in front of a huge door. He opened it, and a picture appeared before his eyes. A mountain of corpses, and on top of it sits a knight in armor. He greeted the hero and introduced himself. His name is Jacob, and he failed to protect everyone and ended up losing everything. The knight did not want Christopher to suffer the same fate. If his reincarnation could endure the pain he had experienced, it would give him the strength to protect everyone he cared about. The hero said that he didn't care what it would be. He would cope, as long as he saved them all. And Jacob said that he would show him his past, and he must endure the hell that the knight went through. Christopher found himself in a beautiful garden near the house, with lots of roses around. But he couldn't speak. Jacob's voice said that he could only watch what was happening here. The hero saw Jacob walking along the rose alley towards the house. A lovely girl ran out to meet him. She ran to him screaming, "Daddy!" He said she was his little princess, and she said she ran as fast as she could to see him. And the father patted his daughter on the head, saying how charming she was. The girl resisted and said that her father would ruin her hairdo. Then a woman came out of the house. It was Jacob's wife. She told her husband that her daughter didn't like it, and her dad was indignant that she was always on her side. The woman's name was Anna, and she replied that it was probably because she was her mother. This was Jacob's family. And then a soldier came running and said that there was an alarm. The enemy was preparing to invade, and his target was their kingdom. And from that moment on, heaven turned into hell. Christopher walked through the castle and saw Jacob trying to find at least someone alive, but everyone was dead. He begged that it was just a dream. His wife, daughter, sister, and mother, all his friends, were killed. Jacob screamed in pain and helplessness and shouted that he would never forgive the bastards who did this. The entire kingdom was destroyed. And then a man in armor appeared and said that it was just an order, and there was no need to attach such importance to it. He stepped on Jacob as he lay there, and Jacob threatened to kill him, and he struck him, saying that he would wait impatiently, and killed him. Christopher found himself next to Jacob, and he said that now he knows and understands everything. His power was transferred to him. The hatred he felt right now would make him stronger. He told the hero to go and show them all their strength. And then a beam of fire flared up in the shelter, and Christopher stood in this beam. The opponents were surprised at what kind of magic it was, and how he remained unharmed. And Christopher was visited by incredible power. He became different. Jacob's determination will not allow him to give up while there is someone to protect. Miller also gave him the Sword of Courage, which protects him from breaking. The attackers screamed that he should be dead, that he was a monster. Christopher burst into a malicious laugh and said that if they wished, he would be a monster, and they don't even have to think that they will survive. But the enemy called for an attack and directed thunder magic at him. Now only ashes will remind him of him, but the lightning and the flash disappeared, and Christopher stood alive. The enemy leader was amazed that Christopher could withstand high-level magic with such a weak body. He was much stronger than the intelligence reported, and Christopher rushed into battle. The leader called his mages to kill him. The hero rushed at the leader, but he did not retreat and struck Christopher, causing him to fall. Adelina screamed, calling him, and the guy understood that he had to protect them. Christopher rose with the last of his strength and rushed at the leader with hatred. He did not understand where such power came from. He dropped his sword, and the hero pierced him through with his sword. As he died, the leader said that their patron would not leave him alone, and Christopher replied that they had picked the wrong enemy. The two surviving attackers were alive. They fell to their knees and begged for mercy. But the hero replied that it didn't make it any easier that they were trying to kill him, and he destroyed them. And he told Adelina that it was all over. Christopher woke up in the hospital. Adeline and Darren were leaning over him. They wanted to make sure he was okay. The head of the department apologized for not being able to help in time because they owed him so much for their salvation. Christopher asked Adeline to bring him some water, and when she left, Darren told the hero that he would leave him guards. Most of their guild is guarding this hospital now, and they won't attack him. Christopher asked to tell him what happened while he was unconscious. Darren said that Adelina was questioned by the police. She told about the attack of the hunters, but unfortunately, they did not find any evidence. Christopher asked how the principal and the children were feeling. The leader replied that they were in the guild office, and that they were fine. The hero asked how the Echo Guild got information about him. Darren replied that it seemed they had a rat. Christopher asked for someone to protect his family. The leader promised them protection and everything they needed, and the hero pointed out the need to figure out the rat. Darren convinced him that he would find it and teach it a good lesson. Christopher was very tired. He said that he trusted Darren and wanted to rest. He ordered them to get out. The director of the guild, Lace, was informed that a spy had been found, and he said to take him to him. The guild members led him to the garage where the spy was locked. The director wanted to deal with him himself. The spy made excuses and begged for mercy. Darren wondered why he would do such a thing if he was so afraid of death. He took out his sword and said that no one would help him, and he needed to enjoy it slowly and surely. Meanwhile, Christopher found himself in a room that was already familiar to him. It was the room of his past life, Brown. Brown said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and it seemed that the hero had not been sitting idle. Christopher said he needed Brown's strength, and Brown said he would teach him the techniques of camouflage and the techniques of killing. Brown said he would teach him a technique that would allow him to hide both his body and his presence in pitch darkness. Christopher was surprised that this was possible. Even S-rank hunters couldn't do this. Brown was offended and asked not to compare him with these scum because he is special, and he got straight to the point. The technique he wanted to teach Christopher was magic. It was the same as hiding behind a curtain. But this ability consumes a lot of mana, like any high-ranking technique. Brown warned Christopher that he would now find himself in pitch darkness. To hide himself, he must become one with the darkness. But being in complete darkness, you can lose your mind. And he clarified whether Christopher still wants to learn this. The hero replied that he had decided, and let's get started. Brown wished him luck, and Christopher plunged into darkness. He saw absolutely nothing. If you stay in the dark for too long, you can go crazy. Christopher asked how much time had passed. He had a feeling that his soul was leaving him, and he was losing his mind. The hero screamed, demanding that Brown let him out of here. But he did not. Christopher waited and kept asking, "Well, when? Well, when? Well, when? How long will he keep him here? Or does he want the hero to go crazy?" The hero thought that this was the end. And then a guy appeared in the darkness, and then there were several of them. They surrounded him, and they all said that Christopher was a weakling. He needs to protect his family, and he whines. That's his whole nature. He's just a weakling. The hero said it wasn't true. And then Brown brought him out of the darkness and said that he looked too helpless, and he just decided to help him and apologized if it offended him. The past life reported that Christopher had learned one of the hidden techniques that makes others tremble with fear. Although his control of darkness is not perfect, but no one in this world can defeat him. It's time to say goodbye. And Christopher woke up suddenly. He was in a hospital bed in a ward. He looked at the time and date on his phone. Not a day had passed, but he felt as if he had been there for a whole year. Then Darren came to his room. He said that they had found the spy and were taking care of him. Christopher was surprised that they worked so quickly and asked what the Echo Guild was doing now. Darren replied that they were preparing for a second attack. The hunters needed to be called in immediately. Christopher stood up and started getting dressed, and said he wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. He was going to attack their headquarters. Darren screamed that this was madness, but the hero replied that he was simply taking care of their soldiers. Yesterday, he wouldn't have managed, but today is a different day, and he is already different. And leaving, he asked Darren once again to take care of his family. Christopher approached the Echo Guild office. He used dark magic and was hidden from everyone in the shadows. No one saw him. While the darkness was with him, he was like a ghost. In his hand was a knife. Today is the last day for the Echo Guild. The guards at the entrance to the office were commenting that the sky had darkened and looked ominous. Then one of them heard something. The second one replied that he was talking nonsense, because they had a magical barrier, and if someone had invaded, an alert would have gone off. He didn't have time to finish speaking before he fell down dead. His partner couldn't understand what was happening, and was shouting who was there. He didn't see anything, but there was an attack. Christopher killed them both, and realized that this is what it means to hide a body behind a curtain of darkness. Even with the slightest shadow, he can hide his presence. This is real magic, and it should go easier than he expected. Darren said that the security around the perimeter of the building is part of their special powers. Therefore, he could boldly kill them, since they dared to attack his family. He walked down the hallway and heard the guild members talking about a mercenary who killed all the Special Forces hunters. A colleague claimed that they most likely sent weaklings, because a strong hunter cannot protect such a weak guild as Lace. Christopher thought that if he was going to destroy everyone, it would be much more convenient and profitable for him to fight in the dark. He walked over to the electrical panel and turned off the lights. From that moment on, it was his show. The entire building was plunged into darkness. The director asked if it was an intruder, but the subordinate replied that no one would dare to intrude into the great Echo Guild. But in the meantime, Christopher was killing everyone in his path. He needed to go up to the director on the 4th floor. There were many guards in the director's office. He asked the assistant how long it would take to repair the electricity, and could he turn on the backup generator? They sent a man to fix the electrics, but he didn't answer. The lights were on in the neighboring buildings, but it was suspiciously quiet on their lower floors. The director thought this was strange. He ordered everyone to arm themselves and line up. There would most likely be an attack. But then, one after another, the hunters in the office began to fall to the floor, dead. Panic began. A guild member shouted that the light had to be turned on. The attacker uses a camouflage technique. They lit the flashlight and saw that 2 S-rank hunters had been knocked out. No one could pinpoint the location of the intruder, but the director said that even he hadn't noticed that someone had broken in. And why would someone with such skills be here? Christopher tried to figure out if the loud man was the director, but because of the light magic, he couldn't see him. And he decided to deal with the annoying hunter mage first, and killed him. The hunters told the director to stand behind them. Everyone was terrified, and another mage ordered the light drones to be launched, as the intruder was hiding in the darkness. He shouted, "Turn on the light! Leave him no place to hide." But all the hunters fell dead one after another. It was all useless. Christopher had cut them all down. There were 3 left. The director asked why the intruder was doing this. The other 2 screamed that he was an A-rank hunter or, in general, a monster, more like an S-rank. And they also fell to the floor. There was only one director left. He stood with a sword in his hands and shouted that it was enough to hide, ordering them to show themselves. He swung his sword around, cutting through the air. And then Christopher showed up. He asked if he really thought he could attack his family and survive, trying to take the most valuable thing, and said that now let him prepare to experience the same thing. He may say one last thing before heading off to his comrades. The director shouted that it was all him, Christopher. The hero asked how he knew who he was. The leader shouted that of course he knew, because he killed Elizabeth. How could he forget the one who was with her in the dungeon, and the only one who remained alive? Christopher said that was nonsense. He didn't kill Elizabeth, and besides, his feelings for her had long since passed. He realized that on the day she broke up with him, it was the director who was in the car she got into. Christopher asked why he attacked the orphanage, but the director shouted that it couldn't be, since Elizabeth was a C rank, and someone like him was the only survivor. He had no idea where Christopher got his S rank from, but he promised to finish him off even so. The hero said he was here to avenge his family. The director said that because of what shelter, he killed everyone here. Christopher realized that the shelter was attacked because of him, and his inaction was putting his family at risk. If so, then he must kill this bastard. The director was surprised that Christopher was using aura, since he had recently been promoted from F rank to C. Christopher was angered by this, remembering that Elizabeth also talked about ranks all the time and measured everything by them. And he said that right now he was fighting a C rank hunter, whom he looked down on like a bug. And the director realized that he was not so simple, and he used flame fever. And he said, "Look closely, this is an A-rank hunter skill." Christopher said that it was a pitiful sight, and even though he was an A-rank hunter, he would dispel his ability in one fell swoop. The director was shocked. It was a fatal blow, and how he got out of it. And Christopher replied that he was on the verge of death 100,000 times in his past lives. He said he would like to play with him a little more, but his time is running out, and there are too many grievances. Christopher began to strike, killing him, and the director, with his last strength, said if he knew who their sponsor was. The hero stopped and thought, if they have a sponsor, and if he continues, then his family will be in danger. The director, dying, said that they would find him at night, and he would get what he deserved. Christopher had to get stronger. He had a sudden headache and heard a voice that they had shared their power with him, and now it was his turn. The voice demanded that he find and bring to him what was rightfully his. Christopher asked where he should look. Ripper was impatient. He wanted to take a look at what was rightfully his. Christopher saw a light. It was coming from a desk drawer. He wondered if Ripper had helped him deal with the guild because of this. He opened the desk drawer and took out a box. It contained a dagger and a necklace. Christopher decided to get out of there quickly and use Brown's magic. The shadow erased all traces from the face of the earth. As soon as the hero left the building, it burst into flames. Since there is no building, there is no proof that he did it. His family will be in danger for some time. Passers-by began to gather around the burning building. A special police unit arrived at the scene. They started asking passers-by what they had seen. The man replied that he had heard an explosion, and when he went out to look, he saw the company building burning. None of the people saw anything suspicious. And another policeman reported that there was absolutely no one inside the building, and not even any bodies were left. The captain thought it was too suspicious. There was an explosion, and there was no one in the building, not even a body. What could have happened? Christopher stood nearby and overheard the conversation. As he expected, there was no evidence left. He did not risk walking through the crowd past the burning building so as not to give himself away. He took the phone and called Darren, told him that there was a fire in the Echo Guild, and asked him to come to the place he had spoken about recently. Suddenly, his body went limp, and he lost consciousness. Darren's voice was on the phone. He didn't understand what had happened. Christopher found himself in a room with a huge library. Another room from his past life, he thought. There were a lot of books. A man stood behind him at the window and said that he had finally arrived. Christopher asked if he was Ripper. Ripper asked if he had brought his things intact. And in the hero's hands was the box he was holding. He handed it to Ripper. He opened it, but the box contained only a necklace. Christopher was confused. He was sure there was a dagger in there. The Reaper thanked him, saying that this necklace was the last thing of the one he once loved. And he remembered his Florian, the love of his life. Her soul came to him. She had dreamed of finding him, her only one, for so long. Her soul embraced him and said that her name was forgotten. Her body was rotten, but her soul had found him. Florian was able to find his reincarnation and will definitely repay him for giving her this moment. And Christopher heard a voice. "We express our gratitude to you for relieving Ripper of excruciating pain. Sympathy for your past lives has increased." The hero woke up. He came to in a hospital bed. There were tears in his eyes, maybe because of his growing sympathy for Ripper. When you enter a past life room, you gain past life power. As you walk through the rooms, you increase your sympathy for past lives. As the coordination is adjusted, the forces increase, and the emotions they experienced, Christopher can experience. He started wiping away his tears before anyone saw them. He realized he was in a hospital. Darren must have helped him. The same box stood on the nightstand nearby. The necklace was missing, but the dagger was still there. Perhaps it was a gift from Ripper. If Guild Director Echo kept it separately, that means something. I need to go see an appraiser. There was a knock at the door, and Darren came in. He asked how Christopher was feeling. He said that his family was relaxing in their office. Christopher thanked him and asked what happened to the Echo Guild. Darren replied that it had been a hard blow, and people had started leaving her, even though it had only been one day. The police launched an investigation, but no evidence was found. Christopher asked to let him know when something became clear, and he also had a request to find a home for him and his family, a safe place. Darren replied that, of course, he and the guild would come up with something, and Christopher asked if there was any unofficial information about what happened to the Echo Guild. Darren said that's all he knows. The hero said he heard that someone was behind the attack on the ECHO Guild office. The head of the department said that of course someone is standing, and this is not the end. This is a heavy blow to the guild, and revenge for it will certainly follow. He promised to do everything possible to track their movements and report to Christopher. After the hero was discharged from the hospital, he went to the appraiser. Seeing the dagger, the appraiser was very surprised. This is a rare item, a sealed weapon. The appraiser explained what this means. Literally, some of its important abilities are sealed. He had only heard of the sealed weapon once, but this was the first time he had seen it. Christopher asked him to tell him more. He said that such weapons come in different types. It is assumed that the true power of the dagger will be revealed step by fulfilling certain conditions. The hero thought that the weapon was not activated at the moment, but the evaluator said that even now there are options to absorb power and improve the user's physical condition. Christopher heard that absorbing power increases efficiency. That makes it a good weapon. According to the dagger information, his name is the Butcher. He didn't know what to do to remove the seals, or if Christopher could do it at all. The appraiser said that if the last seal could be removed, the minimum S level could be obtained. It also has a recovery function. If you shout the word recovery, the dagger will return to the user who shouted the spell. The appraiser finished the appraisal by placing a price of 1,000,000 won on the dagger. Christopher wondered whether the rest of the weapons needed to be appraised. It certainly won't be better than this dagger. Christopher paid the appraiser for the job and went outside. He walked along and reasoned that past lives were using him to settle old scores. Then the phone rang. It was Darren. He said he had found a suitable house, and he offered to look at it. Christopher agreed, and the boss said a car would be coming for him soon. He was taken straight to the house, where the broker and Darren were waiting. Christopher looked at the house, liked it, and asked the broker when he could move in. He replied that if he paid extra, he could move in within a week. Christopher said it didn't matter how much it cost. Money solved everything, and the hero mentally thanked his past lives for this. Past lives were watching him. They were pleased. The singer screamed and admired Christopher's money, and the bodybuilder, another past life, wanted to use this money to pump up his muscles even more. Carsago shouted at them that they would only be allowed in case of force majeure, and from that moment on, Christopher's training was prohibited. He was angry that they made a fool of him for a couple of bucks, and with this approach, all their plans would go to hell. Christopher came to the Lays Guild office to see his family. The children rushed to hug him, saying that they had missed him very much. Adelina came up to him. She invited him to talk, and asked where he had been all this time. He replied that he had come here from the house where their whole family would live. The girl was surprised. Why so suddenly? He couldn't just buy a house because he wanted to buy one. Christopher said he had a good income while he was a mercenary in the Lace Guild, and he wants to use this money to protect his family. Adelina thanked him from the bottom of her heart. She is sure that the children will like it. But she was worried that Christopher had gotten himself into something dangerous, and that was an attack on the orphanage. The hero reassured her that everything was fine, and that he would hire bodyguards and install an unmanned security system in the new house. The Lays Guild will send them a hunter, and everything will be fine. He just wants to be happy with his family. Christopher was about to leave because he had just come in to tell everyone about the new house. But Adelina stopped him and asked him not to leave and to stay the night with them, because she feels safe with him. Christopher agreed to stay. The girls suggested eating ramen together, but Christopher felt sick, said he was very tired, and went to bed. Adelina understood that the hero wanted to take care of all the shelters, because this was the only place where he was accepted and loved without a family. So he would do anything for them, but she didn't want him to lose himself with all that blood on his hands. Christopher lay down on his bed and thought that he had never seen Adeline like this before, and he reproached himself for not going out to eat with her. And then a voice rang out. The sergeant's wicked laugh warned of danger. Someone was aiming for your heart. Christopher jumped out of bed. The dagger appeared next to him in an instant. It was a good thing his room was near the exit. There were 3 people there, and if they weren't eliminated, the family would be in danger. 1 mercenary and 1 mage, and the 3rd, the magician, attacked. The speed of the spell was high. Christopher did not have time to pull out his sword and pushed him with his shield. And then he saw that dagger, and it was flying towards his neck. Christopher dodged and finished off the magician and the mercenary with his shield. But he felt and was sure that there were 3 people. He felt the spirit of death, enveloping the most precious. Christopher burst into Adeline's room. The man was standing next to her bed, brandishing a knife at her. He flew up to him and knocked the knife out of his hands. The man was surprised how he dealt with the other 2 so quickly. Christopher took out Miller's sword, the sword of justice, and finished off the bastard. Thank God Adelina wasn't hurt. But it's strange that no one woke up from such a noise. Maybe they were fed something. And what are the people of the Lays Guild doing? They are supposed to be guarding. We need to contact Darren. He tried to call him, but the subscriber was unavailable. If he doesn't pick up the phone, you can contact the Special Police Department. Christopher sent a text message that someone from the Lace Guild had been attacked and asked them to hurry to the guild. Darren arrived at the office. He told Christopher that Guild Master Lace had died. Christopher was saddened, and he thought that Darren loved her and was probably completely heartbroken. He didn't know what to say, but the head of the department asked to listen to him, even though it might be unexpected. He has already decided who will become the new head of the guild, and he sees Christopher in this position. After all, he will never abuse his trust. The hero was not just a strong man. All members of the guild agreed with his appointment. Will Christopher accept the offer to become the head of their guild? Christopher was shocked by the statement because he was a complete stranger to them. But his past life, the Black Mafia, convinced the hero to accept the offer, and he thought that by doing so, he could ensure the safety of his family, and he wouldn't have any problems. Besides, the guild had no other candidates for this position. All the key leaders are already dead, and Darren is now the one in charge of making such decisions. He begged Christopher very much, and he accepted his offer. And he ordered that all documents about the guild be prepared for his review first. The Black Mafia, the leader of the criminal organization, was pleased. With his ruthless grip, he sees through the guild's falsehood. And Christopher began to study the documents. He was convinced that the financial situation of the guild was good, and this was the only pride of the guild. The number of permanent members was small, and the executive body was small. Darren explained that the guild was originally created to gain the benefits of the magic crystal. Therefore, the hunting corps was created quite recently. Christopher studied all the financial and strategic documents of the guild and came to the conclusion that the strategy needed to be changed. The risk of being absorbed by another guild must be taken into account. Now, Lace switches to an aggressive strategy. The hero reasoned that, judging by the fact that the Echo Guild sent assassins, they are furious. There is no guarantee that this will not happen again. First of all, they had to absorb the Echo Guild. Christopher couldn't sit back and watch any longer. Darren doubted that it was possible, but the hero suggested doing it through an official war. According to the rules, 9 guild representatives compete against each other in a one-on-one battle. And if one of the competitors wins and does not announce a replacement player, then he fights with the next player. And he would win when he defeated everyone. Darren was delighted at the thought. Christopher said that the 2 of them would defeat all 9. The head of the department was worried. How could they do it together? But the hero calmed him down, saying that if Darren defeated at least 2 of them, he would be able to deal with the rest of the Greys himself. And before the war starts, they need to confirm the guild's composition. Christopher is only a C rank, and that will weaken the Echo Guild. Darren noted that there was no reason to declare war on them, but the hero asked if he thought the last attack had been successful. Darren replied that yes, since the guild leader was killed and the guild suffered significant damage. Isn't that a success? Christopher noted that he had called the police special forces before the evidence was destroyed, and now they would be able to sue the Echo Guild for damages. And among the corpses that the police took away, there are members of the Echo Guild. The compensation in the claim must be huge. Then the enemy will not agree to their condition, and they will declare war on them, followed by absorption and merger of guilds. There are justifications and evidence, so the main bureau will allow a formal declaration of war. And Christopher said that action must be taken immediately. In the new house that Christopher rented, children from the orphanage were playing. Darren appeared at the door. He brought them a huge box of toys. The children greeted him joyfully and were pleased with the gifts. Darren went up to Christopher's room and told him that the Echo Guild refused to pay compensation for the damages. Christopher said that everything was going according to plan, and they needed to move on. Guildmaster Echo sat in his office reading the lawsuit. It was unthinkable. He yelled that it had reached the Special Police Department. His subordinate told him another piece of bad news. The Lace Guild had declared war on them. The chief was surprised and asked if the main bureau had given permission. He replied that there was irrefutable evidence and they had no other choice. The chief did not understand, since the Lace Guild had suffered enormous losses. Where did they get the strength for the war? The subordinate replied that they were pinning their hopes on their mercenary. The leader objected that a mercenary could not participate in an official war, and he replied that perhaps they had taken him into the guild. He must be great if they're investing so much in him. The subordinate said there were rumors that he was an A rank. The leader noted that they have no financial problems and can afford to hire A rank mercenaries, so there is nothing to worry about. and asked if the Lace Guild had given a list of participants. The subordinate replied that yes, there was one B-rank person in it, the rest were C-rank. The leader laughed and said that there was no need to mobilize the last surviving A-rank hunter. It would be better to let him go and conduct raids. And the subordinate said that he would then mobilize 5 B-rank hunters. And the leader was glad that victory was in their pocket. Meanwhile, people were discussing the latest news. The fat guy said that he didn't understand how the Lace Guild could declare war, even though they had a C-rank leader. What are they counting on? The tall guy noticed that the guild leader had recently been an F rank. He was lucky and was able to increase his rank. The fat guy replied that it was always like this. Some cheeky guy would come along and just get lucky, and he would rise in rank. And the tall guy said that not only that, but he also suddenly became the head of the guild. A girl sitting at a table in a cafe listened to all these rumors. She smiled. It was funny. It was the second daughter of the head of the corporation, Jail, an S-rank hunter. Her name was Rachel. The B-rank hunter Kevin was sitting at the table with her. He asked her what was so interesting about this guild leader Lace. But she said no. It was just that everyone was talking about him, and she wanted to take a look at him. But Kevin noticed that she had a heightened interest in this chapter. She said that she was not at all interested in bronze-level guilds like Echo or Lace. It's just quite unusual to rise in rank and become the guild leader. After all, he was F rank not long ago. Kevin said that he heard that while clearing a B-rank dungeon, he allegedly wiped out the entire group. Rachel admired how an F-rank hunter could clear a B-rank dungeon by himself. The guy said that Christopher's injuries were so serious that he was not counted among the revived hunters. But he believed that most likely this guy was the awakened hunter. He is a very suitable choice for their newly created guild. But a second awakening is quite rare, and there aren't enough facts to draw conclusions yet. And this war is their chance to find out if he's a second awakening. Rachel said that once the investigation is over, they need to act quickly. Few people know about him yet, but they are not the only ones watching him. And the girl told Kevin to find a way to contact him before the war ended. 10 days had passed since the declaration of war. Christopher was worried that his past lives had not visited him for 10 days. He trained and prepared for battle. The battle would be dangerous, and past lives stopped coming to him even in his dreams. Christopher was outraged that when they needed them, they appeared both in a dream and in reality. But when he needed them, they appeared out of nowhere. He asked them to appear and said that they shouldn't mock him like that. The reason he was waiting for help from his past lives was to avoid repeating the same thing. He remembered how he was bullied at school because he had no parents, and Adelina had to intervene and defend him. How his family supported him and helped him through all the hardships. How he rejoiced when the awakening was confirmed, and even though he was only an F rank, he thought that now he could help his family, repay their care, and protect them. He believed that if he tried his best and put in all his efforts, then everything would definitely work out. But would he be able to protect everyone without his past lives? He was afraid of becoming a failure again, completely ignored by society, with no skills or talent. And what can he do? Just sit and wait for it to happen. Christopher had been training for a long time and was tired. It was already night. He lay in the clearing and thought about how great the power of awakening was. And his capabilities were very limited, so would he be able to cope with everything he had acquired? He can't progress unless his past life appears. So he himself is low-ranked, just like before? He can't go back to that time. Tired and worn out from training, Christopher returned home at night. Adelina noticed that he was returning later and later each day. Christopher sat down on his bed and thought that there had been no progress today either. In fact, he had taken one step back. And what should he do? After all, he is participating in the guild war. He was already falling asleep from fatigue, and asked his past lives to take him to at least some room. And suddenly, he was underwater. He was falling to the bottom and drowning. He didn't understand what had happened, but he knew he had to get out of there. Otherwise, he would die. He tried to row up, but he couldn't. He was very deep. And then he realized that he could breathe. If this was a past life room, why is there still no one? Usually at this point, a past life appears. But since he could breathe underwater, it meant he was in a dream. But he had no time to dream. He asked for someone to appear. Suddenly, a light came on below, and his body moved towards the light, naturally. This warmth was not unfamiliar. He even felt a sense of longing. Here he woke up. It was already morning. He did not understand what it was and why the body moved by itself. He coughed. Then Adelina came in and said that he had just finished training and was already sleeping until noon. And she called him Mr. 20-year-old. Christopher said that today is Sunday and he does not have a day job today. Why not sleep? But Adelina grabbed him and dragged him towards the exit. She screamed at him to stop being unhappy. And didn't he have this feeling that something amazing was going to happen today? But Christopher objected that usually she would never have him. And now, what had suddenly happened? She led him by the hand and said that now everything would become clear to him. He followed her, and memories began to emerge in his head. The corridors of the orphanage, where it was stuffy because of the small windows, and he hadn't heard the words 20 years old, daytime job, for so long. He had completely forgotten about them. Angela was always very calm, but now she was very excited. She led him to the door and told him to go in with his eyes closed. When he went in and opened his eyes, he saw his family and a cake on the table. They shouted, congratulating him on awakening to F rank. This was a precious memory that he had to cherish throughout his life and never forget. This is a piece of his past and how he could live, forgetting this moment of his life. Adelina told him that his awakening had occurred much earlier than usual, but Christopher replied that he hadn't even been given an ID yet, and there was no need to dwell on that. Today was a wonderful day. It was definitely one of his happiest memories, but for some reason he felt very uneasy. He found himself in the water again, and suddenly a huge shark appeared out of nowhere. Christopher started swimming away from it very quickly, and then he found himself in another dream. He had itching and terrible pain all over his body, and he saw there those terrible people who threatened them, and Adelina kneeling, covering her family with her back. Christopher remembered that day clearly, as if it had happened yesterday. The bandit man told them that if they took the money, they had to return it. The director of the shelter begged the man, asked what would happen to the children, and asked him to give them a little more time. The bandit kicked the director and said she was a crazy old woman. Adelina screamed that she would pay off the debt at any cost. She said that she was a C-rank hunter with the gift of a healer and made a good living. Christopher also said that he was also an F-rank hunter and they would try to pay off the debt as soon as possible if they could wait. The man approached the hero and asked what kind of nonsense he was talking. Was he making fun of him? What could he possibly do? He's a low-ranking piece of shit. Does he even know how many mouths there are in his orphanage? We need to figure out the problem first. And he hit Christopher. Then the bandits searched everywhere in the hope of finding money, and left with nothing. Adelina sighed with relief that everything had worked out, and they were all safe. Only there was a mess all around. She told Christopher that his wounds needed to be healed, and told him to lift his face up to him. But he sat on the floor, his face buried in his knees, crying. He felt completely useless, and when he first woke up, he believed that he could protect them all, and he wanted to rise in rank. But when the uninvited guests came, he couldn't do anything. It seems that such a low-ranking brat like him is incapable of anything. Christopher found himself back in the water. The helplessness of that day still kept him going. He felt he had no right to keep happy memories deep in his soul, and all the time he pushed himself to the edge of the cliff. But now everything is different. Now he is driven not by helplessness, but by strength and confidence that he can protect everyone. Christopher decided for himself not to stand still. He had to become stronger. He found the strength in himself and confidently swam to the surface. He came out of the water and saw Carsago. Christopher was very happy to see him. The knight said that they probably made a mistake in deciding to give him powers. The hero admitted that he had become too self-confident, because before he could not do anything, but now he had the power to change something. But he saw the light. Great power comes at a high price. Now, because of the power he had received, his family was in danger. He could no longer sit back and watch his loved ones suffer. And now he has the strength and confidence to protect everyone. And he wants to become even stronger. Stronger than those who threaten him. Carsago realized that he was desperate and told him to pick up his weapon. He would teach him a defensive counterattack. It is different from the shield strike. It is the most powerful counterattack skill. If Christopher experiences this attack himself, it will be better than any explanation. The knight called on Christopher to unleash his best attacking technique. And he attacked. But Carsago repelled the attack without making the slightest move. And he said, "From now on, watch carefully." And he showed him how to absorb the blow. Absorbing a blow from an opponent allows you to release powerful energy in double quantity. There is only one way to gain this skill: to fully withstand this energy without experiencing any lack of it. Carsago directed the energy at Christopher and saw that he was not yet ready to receive such power. But they did not have time. But to his surprise, Christopher withstood Carsago's martial art, and the knight congratulated him. Now this technique belonged to the hero, and so the day of the Guild War came. The team was sitting in the waiting room of the Lace Guild, and Darren was reassuring everyone that there was nothing to worry about, because the guild leader would handle everything personally. But the team was not in a good mood. They did not trust the guild leader because they did not know who he was and what kind of imposter he was. The mood was mournful, and then a member of the Echo Guild burst into their room. Christopher told him to leave immediately. Before the battle, it was forbidden to enter the enemy's room. But he clowned and refused to leave. He said that he was a member of the guild and was tasked with checking the readiness of the Lace Guild for war. Christopher told him to leave peacefully, but he was indignant and said what could a C-rank hunter do to him, since he was a B-rank, and he began to use his murderous energy. But the hero was indifferent to it, and the uninvited guest was at a loss as to how he could resist it. And then the bloodthirsty essence of the Reaper awakened. The thirst for murder was released. Guild member Echo was bound by something invisible. He felt like something was suppressing him. A murderous energy. Christopher stopped, and he ran away, barely alive. The hero thought that for at least a split second, he wanted to kill him. The higher the level of sympathy for past lives, the less sensitive he becomes to murder. Christopher turned around. All the team members were looking at him with admiration. He told them that everything was fine, and not to worry. But they all said enthusiastically that they believed in the guild leader. Then one of the hosts came in and said that in 30 minutes the guild war would begin, and they needed to move to field number 4. They decided to move forward, and Christopher was confident that everything would work out. When they entered the field, they saw how many spectators had come. Although it was not a large guild war, there were a lot of spectators. Christopher's family also came out to support him, and Darren said the hunting community had taken an interest in him. Adelina whispered to him, "Good luck." And he realized that he had to win for his family. And the host announced that the official war of the Lace Guild against Echo was beginning. And he invited the first participants to the field. Darren took to the field promising victory, and Christopher reminded him that he only had to defeat 2 opponents. And the host introduced the first participant from the Lays Guild, B-rank battle hunter, Darren. The first member from the Echo Guild is a B-rank magic-using hunter, Murphy. The Guild War will be held under the control of the Dispute Resolution Committee of the Guild General Bureau, and the battle has begun. Murphy told his opponent that he would not be able to resist his magic with such a dagger, but Darren boldly struck. He used a fire sword, but Darren dodged it. He started to strike, and the enemy surrendered. "Victory!" Christopher shouted encouragement at Darren, and wondered if he had put in too much effort to begin with. The second battle began. The host invited the participants to the field. Darren won this time too, but was wounded. The host suggested that he take a replacement because of his wounds. He agreed and announced the third duel as a participant in the hunter Christopher. The hero praised Darren and said that everything was going according to plan. He could handle the rest himself, and asked him to make a good video for Tube. The players entered the field. Christopher activated his aura. The spectators were confused as to where such skills came from for a C-rank hunter. Rachel and Kevin were in the audience and realized that it would be quite interesting, and Christopher defeated one participant after another. Compared to the tricks that his past lives had played on him, this was sheer nonsense. And finally, the last round came. The host announced that if Hunter Christopher won, then the Lace Guild would win the final victory. Hunter Albert came out from the Echo Guild. He had a huge sword in his hands. He couldn't even imagine that the enemy would use aura, but no one had ever been able to defeat his sword, and he rushed to attack. But to his surprise, Christopher had disappeared, and at that moment he appeared in a jump above his head. Albert said that he was surprised, but he should not think that he could win. Guardian Carsago leads a righteous counterattack. The unwavering shield becomes a sharp spear aimed at your enemies. Albert could not stand this reception and gave in, asking to stop the attack. The host announced that the ECHO Guild Hunter had surrendered, and therefore the Lace Guild was the winner. Guildmaster Echo was furious. He broke the table in anger. He stood up and left the field. And Christopher, smiling, thought that since Echo had been defeated, there shouldn't be any problems with mergers and acquisitions. Darren greeted Christopher. He had already been treated. He told the hero to hurry up, as everyone was already waiting for him. The guild members met him and admired him. It was magnificent. They shared their impressions and admired his strikes and techniques. They thanked him, saying that he was the best guild leader. And they couldn't calm down. Darren almost pushed them home by force. Christopher asked Darren if he had filmed the video. He said he had already and uploaded the footage to TUBE. Tube is a video hosting service that is often used by hunters. There is no opportunity to film well in dungeons. That is why there are so many other videos to promote their guilds. Christopher knew that the more popular the video, the more popular the guild. But they still didn't know who was behind ECHO. And then Kevin came into the room. Darren blocked Christopher with his body and asked why he came here. The guy asked, "Isn't the hero an A rank?" And he urged them not to be afraid. They didn't come here to fight. Darren asked who they were, and Rachel walked in. She was eager to see the hunter, the guild leader. Christopher knew she was S rank, so fighting was stupid. She walked up to him, introduced herself, and said he looked even more interesting in person. The hero realized that she was the daughter of the head of the jail corporation, which ranks second in business circles. But how did she reach S rank? He read about her in the news. He shook her hand and said it was nice to meet her. Christopher asked what she had come for, since the jail corporation had no guilds under its direct control. Rachel said she hadn't seen the need for it before, but if it became necessary, it wouldn't be a problem to create a guild. And she offered Christopher to take the place of the head of the guild, which would be created under the direct subordination of the jail corporation. And the hero heard a voice. The absolute emperor of novels calls to reject the offer. Otherwise, you will not receive his protection. Christopher realized that this was a new past life, and he refused the offer. Although it was very tempting, Kevin asked him to give a reason for his refusal, and Christopher replied that he didn't like being bossed around. Darren was delighted and shed tears, once again convinced of the correctness of his decision to choose Christopher as the head. Rachel said Christopher thought too highly of himself. Darren was furious and said she was overreacting. The hero replied that perhaps he was not worth so much now, but this would not last long. She called him self-confident. Christopher agreed and left, saying goodbye. Kevin and Rachel headed to the car. The guy asked if she was okay. After all, they hadn't reached their goal. She said that even if he is awakened, the maximum he can achieve is S rank, no matter how hard you fight, and she will definitely make him regret his decision. Sometime later, Christopher was sitting in his office with a pile of papers. Darren told him that an offer had come from the Silver Layer, but he replied that he was not going to move anywhere. But he was ready to accept any unofficial sponsorship. But the jail corporation never contacted again. And if they had carried out S-rank raids, the reward from the corporation would have been huge. Darren said that if Christopher's rank changes, even Rachel will change her mind. We need to wait for the dungeon administration to take action. Christopher didn't understand what would change if the rank changed, but Darren replied that the reason why Gold and Platinum guilds don't take any action, this is because the rank of the guild leader of Lace is only C. Never is a hunter with a lower rank than themselves appointed to the post of guild leader. The video had gained a lot of views online, and Darren was sure that the dungeon administration would contact him during the day. And then Darren said that Christopher had a visitor. He was from the Diamond Layer Guild, of which there were only 15 in the entire country. The hero came out to meet him. The man introduced himself as Brad, the HR manager of the company Innovations. Christopher was flattered that the people from the Diamond Layer were interested in him, and Brad said that it was a great honor for him to meet them. And he said that Christopher was nicknamed a super newbie in high-ranking guilds. Thanks to the video, he became popular throughout the country. The manager handed the hero a paper that described all the conditions that their corporation offered. And if Christopher signs, he can immediately take a leadership position in their guild. The offer was tempting, but by signing it, he would simply become a servant of the guild and would not receive Romanov's patronage. The hero apologized and said he couldn't give an answer right now, but the manager objected that it was rare for anyone to get such a chance. But Christopher still refused. When the hero finished working with the papers, he heard the voice again and found himself in front of the door to the room. He realized that it was Romanov. When Christopher entered, he saw untold riches. Gold, jewels, ornaments, coins lay in mountains everywhere. On the throne above all this grandeur sat an old man with a beard and a crown. He was dressed in royal clothes. Romanov called Christopher over to him. Then he rushed towards him and said that he had been watching him closely. When Karsago noticed him, they were all against it. But then Miller and Brown recognized him too. Romanov could not even imagine that Christopher would soak up their training so quickly. Although he lost his way in the middle of the way, he was able to achieve what he wanted. So he became interested in him. Christopher asked why he forbade him to become a servant of any guild, and for the sake of his patronage, the hero refused all offers from other guilds. Romanov replied that the one who is under his protection cannot be someone's servant, and he said that he would provide him with patronage. And he put his hand on the hero's shoulder, and a huge flow of energy went out. Romanov told Christopher to endure, even if it hurt a lot. A stream of energy pierced the hero's body. He endured intense pain, as if his body was pierced through. But he endured. The past life was surprised, because he should have gotten used to the pain, but Christopher claimed that this was a different pain than the one he had experienced before. Romanov ordered to clear his mind so that he could use his magical power. Christopher concentrated on the magic, and a yellow crystal appeared in front of him. He touched it and found himself in the battlefield. He saw the war. The castle of Emperor Romanov was attacked. The knights ordered the temperature to hide, but he refused, deciding to die here alone with this country, taking his enemies with him, and he gave the order to the knights to get out of here. And so he died heroically. Christopher returned to the room. Romanov asked if he understood how to use his patronage. The hero said no, and the emperor smiled, saying that apparently his mind had taken him to a completely different place. And he said that in order to activate his patronage, you need to concentrate the magic in your eyes on the person of the person. And then he will know the true essence of man, what he is. This way, Christopher will be able to understand who he can keep close to him and who he shouldn't let in. This skill will be very useful to him. But he must understand that the opportunity to know the true name is, to some extent, also a curse. In the morning, Christopher woke up and went down to the living room. Adelina was sitting there. Having wished her a good morning, the hero decided to test his new skill on her. He looked at her to find out her true name and realized that she was a devoted assistant. Christopher smiled and sat down next to him, asking what his schedule was for today. Adelina said that a hunter from the dungeon administration would come to him at 3 o'clock today, and because of the large number of things to do, she needed to go to work early. Christopher thanked his sister for helping him and taking on the duties of his secretary. She replied that she was doing it because she enjoyed it, and it was only for a while. Darren was waiting for the hero in the courtyard of the house. He wanted to accompany him. Christopher decided to find out his true name and learned that he was a blind believing knight. The guy didn't quite understand what that meant. They got into the car and drove to the guild office. At 3 o'clock, right on schedule, a representative of the second team of dungeon administration hunters came to their office. His name was David. Christopher asked, did he come to hand over the certificate of promotion? He replied that yes, but he came in person because he had a proposal for the guild leader. He handed Christopher an A-rank hunter ID. Christopher was very pleased. Now the Platinum and Gold guilds will contact him. And then David made his proposal. They wanted Christopher to become a national hunter. And if he agrees, he can work not only in the administration of the dungeons, but also in other national organizations. The hero asked if they were making him such an offer. Then they were probably offering excellent conditions. David pulled out the terms and conditions and silently cursed the manager who wrote them. The terms weren't very good. They were offering B-level standards for an A-level hunter. Christopher didn't like it, and Darren said that yesterday they were visited by people from the Innovation Corporation, and those were the conditions. David apologized, saying he couldn't offer a better one. It wasn't in his power, and he admitted that when he saw the video on Tube, he already knew then that it would be unlikely that he would be able to hire Christopher, but he really wanted to recruit him. Unfortunately, the current dungeon administration cannot provide competitive conditions. David seemed like a good man to Christopher, but he was ashamed and hurried away as quickly as possible. The hero looked through the papers and was glad that the merger and absorption of the guild was at the final stage. Adeline noted that they should be done by the end of the week. And then Darren entered the guild leader's office. He reported that during the process of checking and studying the documents of the Echo Guild, the secret funds of the guild leader were discovered, and he handed Christopher the supporting documents. He looked through the materials and was shocked by the amount in the accounts. With this money, one could have founded another guild, and there would still be some left over. Darren asked what the leader wanted to do. He could inform the guild general office, or he could quietly absorb all the secret funds. And then he wouldn't have to tell anyone anything. He promised to clean up all the documents and prevent information leaks. Christopher approved the idea and relied on his assistant. In a dark, quiet alley, Darren met a B-rank combat hunter. The hunter reported that he had conducted an investigation, during which he was unable to find out who was behind all of this. But the target's current security status leaves much to be desired, and it appears the secret customer has abandoned it. Darren noted that this makes sense, and he asked if they could clear everything. The hunter said yes, of course. The Echo Guild leadership has been completely disbanded, and the target only has a handful of bodyguards, so he should have no trouble settling this matter. And Darren really asked him to clean it up, since he doesn't want to drag the head of the guild into these matters and let their hands freeze only between the two of them. He didn't want Christopher to get involved in things like that. It was night, raining. Somewhere in a quiet, dark corner sat the former head of the Echo Guild. He begged for mercy. Darren leaned over him, but he asked to leave him alive, said that he would give them all the secret funds. If only they would not kill him. He would still be useful to them. They just don't know who his patron is. Darren thought that if he left him alive now, sooner or later he would get a knife in the back. And he told him that they had already taken over all the secret accounts of the guild without his participation. So he will die quickly and painlessly. And killed him. Hunter said that this is the end of the ECHO Guild. Darren asked him to destroy all the evidence, and he thought that he had done everything he had to, and it was time to go back. In the morning, he walked into Christopher's office and said that he had received notification from the Guild General Office that the absorption and merger process had been completed. The Echo Guild does not exist. And finally, they will be given all the necessary materials. It was great, but the only sad thing was that the Echo Guild workers started leaving en masse. Apparently, they didn't like them. But there was nothing to be done about it, and Darren said that it looked like half of them would leave. But Christopher said that the core team of dungeon raiders could not be allowed to leave, and told Darren to renew their contracts if necessary. There was only one A-rank hunter left in the Echo Guild. It was Arnold, a combat hunter and the leader of the invasion team. The number of A-rank hunters in the Echo Guild has always been small. Also, the number of permanent members of the guild was small, and the size of the executive apparatus was several times larger. And Christopher thought that perhaps the guild was organized to do dirty deeds for the behind-the-scenes client. We need to look at everything from this position. The guild leader told Darren that he wanted to see and talk to Arnold. He said that he would organize everything now. Arnold came to the head's office. Darren greeted him and said that he had heard about him. At that time, Christopher used Romanov's magic and saw his real name, the commander of the vanguard of desperate and great deeds. He stood out from the crowd, Christopher decided. I greeted him and suggested getting straight to the point. The leader said he wanted him to stay in the guild. But Arnold objected. Why all of a sudden? After all, he made a contract with Echo, not with Lace. But Christopher thought, since he came, it means he definitely wants to get something. And he offered him to raise the terms of the contract. But Arnold said that it was not enough. And the chief asked what else he wanted. The hunter said he wanted to go to an S-rank dungeon. The Echo Guild had never given him such an opportunity. And he even screamed that, in general, he had never been there. A hunter is someone who is chosen by force. Arnold said that he had nothing left in life except hunting, and he proudly drags this destiny given to him from above. But the former guild leader preferred not to take risks. He already had a labor shortage. Arnold started screaming that they were cowards and kicked the table. Christopher thought that he was too carried away by the dungeons and was about to destroy everything here. But the hunter said he had to evolve. He couldn't stop. He needed more challenging tasks to grow. And he understood that in order to defeat an S-rank dungeon, you need to have at least an A rank. And only he and Christopher have that rank. Arnold said that he saw the Guildmaster and his attacks on the battlefield back then. He was finally convinced that Christopher was an awakened hunter. Although he knew little about the reawakening of hunters, He saw that Christopher had a fairly fast growth rate, and he was sure that the boss would soon be promoted to S rank, and he asked him to join him in a raid on an S rank dungeon when that day came. And Christopher told him that if he stayed in the guild, he would keep his position as the leader of the raiding team. And the guildmaster will be on the list for the first attack on the S rank dungeon. Arnold was satisfied and signed the contract, and he said that from now on he would completely rely on Guildmaster Lace. Several months passed. About half of the people from the Echo Guild signed contracts and stayed in the Lace Guild. Christopher thought that more than half would go away. But fortunately, much less than expected went away. Darren said it was because the guild leader was an A rank, and people saw the strength in him. The guild leader asked how the guild recruited new members. Darren replied that they could use advertising thanks to the secret fund. Everything was going swimmingly. But Darren said that they needed to increase the guild's productivity. To do this, you need to raid the dungeon for 1 guild link. But first, reorganize as quickly as possible. The next day, Darren reported that the reorganized raiding team was to attack the B-rank dungeon. It was time to move out. Christopher said that it would be better to activate the second team first and then connect it to the first. The guild leader decided to go with the team personally. And since 1 A-rank hunter is enough for this dungeon, he ordered Arnold to stay in the office and start planning for a third team. Since the guild has grown in size, it would be nice to have 3 teams. Arnold replied that he could be relied upon and happily ran to carry out the order. Christopher went on a raid. He left the building and was getting into his car when he heard Adelina calling him. She barely managed to run and asked to take her with him. She also wanted to be useful, and she needed to grow and develop. Christopher asked Darren if it would be okay if another hunter-healer went with them. Darren replied that it was up to the guild leader to decide, and that nothing bad would happen if another hunter went with them. And Christopher invited his sister into the car. When they arrived at the scene, the entire team was already assembled. The leader of the second team of invaders, Donald, approached Christopher. His team included those who had transferred from the Echo Guild to Lace. He was pleased to meet the guild leader. Christopher used Romanov's skill and learned that Donald was a diligent guardian. The leader introduced the new member Adelina to the team. He said that she was a healer and had little experience, and they began to seize and went into the dungeon. The dungeon was dark and empty. The team launched the drones and moved on. They heard some sound approaching. It was orcs. 5 orcs and 5 berserkers. The hunters charged. Donald used a fireball. Christopher said that they needed to be dealt with quickly. Protracted battles were dangerous. A few blows, and they were finished. The hunters said that it was as if something had slipped between them, and they didn't even have time to engage. They were shocked by Christopher's level and did not understand who this man was, but he ordered them to move on. On the way, they encountered orcs and destroyed them. The guild leader suggested the team take a break. They worked hard, and then the door to the dungeon closed. Christopher had been in a similar situation before. He and Donald looked at each other and realized that this was a hidden dungeon. The team leader called for calm, and Christopher said that this dungeon is not B rank, but at least A. He didn't even know if the hunters had any experience and what kind. The team members said that although it sounded scary, they had to try to capture this dungeon. And Christopher said that if they were unlucky, they might run into an S-rank dungeon. The team decided to gather and organize. Christopher approached Adeline and told her that in 30 minutes they would be entering the boss's room, and that she should, if possible, not leave Donald. She would be safer with him than with Christopher, since he would be walking ahead. The sister was indignant, but the hero calmed her down, saying that she was a healer and should remain alive until the very end. She was confident that this time she would be useful to the guild leader. The team concentrated, and they went inside. Brown's wicked laugh warned of an ambush. The hidden blade is aimed at your heart. And then they were attacked. The team was surrounded. Each hunter used his abilities. A tearing wind, a wall of flame, and the ambush was destroyed. And then a high-level orc of A rank, a warlord, appeared. Apparently, it was a boss, but it couldn't appear in a B-rank dungeon. Karsago's shield of justice and Miller's sword came to Christopher's aid, and he rushed into battle with the boss. But he disappeared. The hero caught up with him, noticing that he was moving very fast for such a monster, but still slower than him. Karsago's shield transformed into a sharp spear, and Christopher aimed multiple blades at the boss. The orc fell, but remained unharmed and rushed to attack the hero. Christopher faced such an attack for the first time. The commander wounded him, and with a cry, "Let the man die," he rushed into the next attack. Christopher thought it was all over. But then he gathered his courage. He knew he had to finish this monster off, or everyone would suffer. And as soon as the orc opened up, the guild leader dealt him a crushing blow and killed him. Donald said they would take care of the rest themselves, and Christopher noted that they had done a good job. But it was a monster that could talk. The leader suspected that such varieties existed, but this was astonishing. And then the door opened. A bright light was pouring out of it. They were delighted and headed towards the exit. But a dagger flew out of the light and struck the hunter. He fell to the floor. Adelina ran up to him and used her healing skill. Christopher knew that the wound was fatal and that his sister's healing abilities would not keep him alive for long. And Brown warned Christopher again of danger. Someone was lurking in the shadows, trying to strike at his heart. The attack was so fast that the guild leader didn't even notice it, and he didn't sense anyone's presence. Is this a trap? Christopher told everyone to be on guard, as they did not know from which direction the attack would come. And then the orc swordmaster appeared. He immediately attacked one of the hunters and mortally wounded him. The wounded hunter shouted for everyone to run. It was an S-rank monster. And he went towards Adeline, who was healing the wounded man, and he said hello to her. Donald tried to protect her, and he threw her aside from the monster's path. Christopher ordered everyone to run, and he would try to hold him back. The wounded hunter grabbed Adelina in his arms and tried to run away. She objected that he was wounded, but he said that now was not the time for that. But the swordmaster caught up with him and pierced him with his sword. He fell and dropped Adelina on the floor. The sister thought that she was completely useless again. Christopher realized that the monster didn't hit vital points on purpose. It left them wounded so that Christopher would be distracted. All the wounded begged Adelina for healing. She asked them to hold on a little longer, but the orc confidently walked towards the girl. Christopher wanted to save her and decided to drive the monster away from his sister first. The guild leader attacked the orc, but he repelled the attack and said that he moved like a rat. He grabbed Christopher by the face and began to absorb his powers. Christopher kept thinking about Adeline. He had to win at any cost. He broke free from the monster's clutches and began to fight him. But it was all useless. But then the orc told Christopher that he was using special sword techniques that even high-level masters were unaware of. He asked if the boy was the sword master's apprentice. Christopher asked if he should answer, but the monster said he had to, and he continued the fight. The guild leader was exhausted and wounded. He was losing. And then Adelina aimed her healing technique at him. Her mana was depleted. It was already at its limit. But with the last of her strength, she had to help Christopher. He recovered a little and rushed to attack, but the monster wounded him again. The sister came to him and tried to heal him, but he had lost too much blood. She begged and pleaded with him not to die, trying with her last strength to heal. But her mana ran out. While he was suffering, she could do absolutely nothing. The orc came up and grabbed the barely alive Christopher and threw him from a height onto the floor. Adelina took the knife and stood between him and the monster. She asked Christopher if he remembered the day their shelter was attacked, and sister remembered. She had never been able to tell him. He needed words of comfort then, more than anyone else, but she was too busy with herself. After a desperate search for herself, she finally saw Christopher. But he didn't think about that day and kept moving forward. And she decided to protect him to the last, and if he sees tomorrow, then she is ready to die for it. And then she heard a voice. It said, "You sacrificed yourself for someone dear to you. Emperor Romanov skips the trial of the paladin." Adelina thought she was experiencing auditory hallucinations, and the voice said that she had obtained the essence of noble paladin. Use the sword to protect the people you love. Her mana was replenished, and she thought that if she had received this power, she should use it at any cost. A beam of light poured out of her hand. The hunters lay wounded and thought that this was a secondary awakening. She used the holy spear and rushed at the monster. Christopher came to his senses and knew he had to save her. He called Ripper, and the essence of the Reaper awakened within him. Part of the lust for murder was released, and he rushed at the monster, but it threw him aside. Falling, Christopher asked how Adelina was and what kind of energy. She replied that she didn't know. Her mana began to replenish and overflow. She was all glowing with light. The hero said that it was like an awakening and she had to heal everyone. The sister healed him. The swordmaster said that they were wasting their time, pathetic little humans. It was all useless. But Christopher, having gathered his strength, ordered him to shut up and die, and struck. The orc was wounded, but still alive. And then Adelina used the holy spear and finished off the monster. Once they were sure that the orc was dead, Adelina began to heal all the hunters on the team. Finally, she could be useful too. The girl healed everyone. Everyone from the team was alive. Did they defeat an S-rank monster? Donald came to his senses and ran to the guild leader to make sure he was safe and sound. Then he saw that everyone else was alive and was touched. The team leader called it a real miracle and burst into tears. They thought he was completely morally exhausted. And then the gates opened. Finally, they would return home. Christopher and Adelina were the last to come out. Darren pounced on them. He was already in a bite and was very worried. He was outraged at how these damn bureaucrats could have messed up and misjudged the rank of the dungeon. The rest of the hunting team had already been taken to the hospital, and Darren asked if they wanted to get checked out too. Christopher said he would rather rest in his bed than go to the hospital. They were very tired. Darren put them in the car and sent them home, ordering them to get a good rest. Christopher finally got into his bed, thought it was pure hell, and he needed to go somewhere. He fell asleep and found himself in Romanov's room. Opening the door with his foot, Christopher was angry, asking after all it was he who controlled him. After all, I felt his mana during the fight. What happened? The Emperor replied that there were already forces inside that dungeon, and he simply intervened a little to help Christopher's subject reach his potential. The hero screamed that Adelina was not his subject. Romanov said that it did not matter. The main thing was that his strength and defense perceived her as his subject. Christopher shouted that he hadn't asked for it. Why did he decide that? The Emperor said he would know when the time came. Then the hero asked if there were other people whom Romanov considered his subjects. He answered that there were, but he would not name them. But he can tell how many there are. And besides the subject Paladin, there is another one. But over time, there will be more. And then Christopher can establish a monarchy. And besides, he has a subject with special loyalty. The hero understood that he meant Darren, a blindly believing knight. And Romanov said to use him. Meanwhile, the head of the 4th Brigade of the Dungeon Management Investigation Bureau arrived at the office of the Division Administration. He asked his subordinate if he had processed the data and who had cleared the dungeon. He replied that it was the Lace Guild. The leader had already heard of it. And I was terribly surprised how a squad with one A-rank hunter cleared out an S-rank dungeon. They went into the office to double-check and assess the situation, and they decided that they needed to re-evaluate the Lace Guild. And then, the head of the 3rd Brigade of the Dungeon Management Investigation Bureau entered his office, and he requested all the materials on the investigation of the dungeon that had just been conducted. The head of the 4th Brigade objected, but he said that everything was confidential, and all that was needed was that the materials were needed by the Bureau. The next morning, in the guild office, Lace Darren asked Christopher how Adelina was. He replied that he would rest a little more and be fine. In the beginning, everything is always confusing. She will need to understand where the strength comes from and put her thoughts in order. The chief asked Darren what was new, and he handed him the investigation materials that had arrived in the morning. It clearly stated that it was a hidden dungeon. That means the Bureau knew about it. That means someone deliberately falsified the results of the preliminary investigation. But who could dare to do such a thing? And Darren assumed that it was the work of the sponsors of the former Echo Guild. He was at a loss and did not know what to do. Christopher said that they would first use the secret fund to strengthen the power of the executive and intelligence agencies, and he asked to do this as soon as possible because they must be ready when the enemies decide to attack. Christopher then asked Darren what he knew about the hidden dungeons. He replied that hidden rewards could be obtained in these dungeons, and he asked the chief what he received, rare materials or rare weapons, but he replied that he had received Adeline's awakening. Darren suggested increasing security at Christopher's house, as he could be a target, including for the reward from the hidden dungeon. Assign hunters to the house, and he also thought about assigning a bodyguard to the head of the guild. Christopher thought that Darren was one of those people he trusted. He was his right hand, his loyal assistant. Then a man entered his office. He introduced himself as the head of the intelligence department of the Lace Guild. The leader activated Romanov's ability, and his real name was Sliding Shadow. Christopher thought that this man really was moving silently and unnoticed. Darren said that this leader would be responsible for guarding Christopher's house. He was a long-time hunter. He could be relied upon and promised not to let us down. He was appointed head of security. A loyal assistant reported that since information about clearing the dungeon had spread, they could not avoid battles. But Christopher assured that as long as he was determined, he would not be defeated. As soon as they began to attack, they would punish them and show the whole country how strong they were. And soon they will all understand that in the future no one will be able to resist them. Meanwhile, the two men, the chairman and his assistant, were talking about the Lace Guild clearing out the S-Class dungeon. Their informant reported this. The chairman objected that, judging by the rank of their group, they should have been destroyed, but not a single hunter died. How is this possible? The assistant replied that either the guildmaster was actually stronger than expected, or one of the hunters had a secondary awakening. Either way, they are a threat. The chairman said they must be destroyed before they become stronger. The assistant said that if they act on their own initiative, the leader group will not remain on the sidelines. The chairman said that they wouldn't act themselves. They would just tell others, spread the rumor that the Lace Guild had found something in the dungeon. Christopher arrived home late in the evening. He and Darren had been training. He asked his faithful assistant if he hadn't felt his presence during training. Darren replied that he only noticed him the moment he heard his voice. The chief was pleased. He said that it was good, because he had trained his stealth for a long time. The right hand reminded Christopher that he had lost his shield in the last battle. It had turned to dust, and he presented him with a gift, although not of such a high class, but he chose it with his heart. There was a guard at the entrance to the courtyard of the house. They were recruits from military units, 10 hunters of E, D, and C rank. Everyone is armed with firearms, and Christopher said that they don't know who will attack and when, so they need to be on guard. The head fell asleep and found himself in front of the door again. There was an inscription on it, a shadow behind it. Christopher immediately realized that this was Brown's room and was very happy. He was waiting for him. Brown knew that his reincarnation was in danger, and he said that the first blessing would not be enough. Christopher was delighted that he would give him a new blessing. He trained a lot, and their connection and compatibility increased greatly. He was eager to know what gift he would receive, and Brown replied that it was the ability to send his shadows to spy on the enemy from afar. Now this power is very useful to him, and he asked if Christopher was ready to accept him. He answered that he was, and he prepared himself for pain. Brown put his hand on his shoulder. A stream of energy went through him, and pain shot through Christopher's body. Foreign memories rushed through his head. When the blessing was received, the leader sat down on the floor. It was hard for him. Why does he have to go through this every time he communicates with past lives? The teacher said that as soon as he received the blessing, memories from his past life would come to him, a trickle-down effect. And if he had learned magic, it would have been easier for him to understand. Christopher asked with delight if he had really been a magician in his past lives. Brown replied, "Well, if he had 990,000 lives, then of course." Moreover, magicians of different spheres, and finally suggested to try to use the blessing. The hero stood up and created a shadow. The teacher praised him and told him to create another shadow. But Christopher couldn't do it. That was his limit. The spell took too much mana. To create one shadow on the first try is already a great result. And then you need to practice. Brown ordered him to go and create a shadow of his enemy. In his current state, he is capable of doing so. Christopher was jogging in the park late at night. He was running and thinking that if the information had already leaked, then the gold and silver guilds would already know about him, and which guild will be interested in him first. And then he heard Darren's voice from behind. I think it was Anderson's guild. The hero was very scared from the surprise. He asked Darren where he came from, but he replied that he had promised to be his faithful assistant and was ready to appear at any time, in any place. The leader asked why Anderson, and the assistant answered, because this guild is leading everyone now, leading any actions. Even among the silver guilds, the Andersons have a bad reputation. They use forbidden methods. Not only are there constant disputes at the top, but their leader is also greedy to the point of horror. It is said that they tried to steal A-rank weapons, but failed. Christopher said that in that case he would send a personal informant to them. Darren asked who it was, but the chief said that he couldn't say, but he could be trusted. The leader entered the room, created a shadow, showed him a photo of the leader of the Anderson Guild, and ordered him to follow him. Meanwhile, 2 minibuses were driving along the road, inside of which were fighters from the Anderson Guild, and they were heading to the Lace Guild. The commander announced to them that their opponents were the leaders of a small bronze guild and a couple of guards. Therefore, they will easily win and take the treasure by any means, and asked if everyone understood. Everyone answered that, yes. Their task is to catch and escort everyone. But one guy asked what to do if they can't catch them. The commander replied that then he would kill them cruelly and instill fear in them. But the guy noted that there were small children there. The boss grabbed him sternly and asked since when hunters were interested in such trifles. The guy apologized. They arrived at the place. It was quiet in the yard. Security was standing around the perimeter. Anderson's team attacked them and quietly cleared out all the guards around the estate. The second team was called, and they went inside. The order was to kill everyone except the target. They began. The bandit reached out his hand to open the door, and his hand was cut off. The team did not understand what was happening. The house was empty, as if no one had ever been there. This was basically impossible. Someone attacked them. They couldn't figure out the enemy's location. There was no one around, and the team's hunters began to die one after another. But who did it was unclear. The bandits started shouting that if they didn't leave, they would all be dead, and they decided to retreat. But something kept killing them. In fear and horror, they saw no one. And then Christopher appeared, and he said that by deciding to attack his guild, they had signed their own death warrant. He called all the heads of the Lace Guild, and they jumped out from all sides with weapons. The bandits were surrounded. They realized that they had been trapped from the very beginning. The head of the intelligence department asked what they should do with the bandits. The chief replied that we must make sure that none of the bandits escaped from here, and everyone rushed to attack. The bandit team couldn't resist them, and the commander told them that since things had turned out like this, they had to at least find the guildmaster and get rid of him, and he ordered to find him. But then he heard Christopher's voice, asking if they were looking for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. The leader told him not to worry. They wouldn't kill him right away. Christopher told him to send a message to Anderson that the Laces had taken hostages, and they will see how he reacts to the bait. Meanwhile, at the Anderson Guild headquarters, Executive Manager Greg stood in the hallway and thought. He remembered his little sister. She was in the hospital, and he came to visit her. The nurse asked him how he felt after his second awakening. Did he have more strength? He replied that not really, and ordered her to eat to get better faster. She should eat well and rest. He doesn't worry about anything or money anymore. He will become a hunter, just like he dreamed, and he will try to make her proud of him. And then his boss called him over and told him to submit a report to the head of the Anderson Guild. Greg entered the head's office and interrupted their conversation with Director Audrey. He ordered her to leave. The executive manager reported that the entire team sent to Lace's guild had perished, except for 4 hunters who had been taken hostage. The guild leader, Baxter by name, was confused. Greg told him that they had received a message from the Lace Guild. Apparently, they had somehow found out about the attack, and he read their message. It said, "Hold a press conference and make an official statement that you attacked us. In this case, we will return the hostages to you safe and sound. Otherwise, prepare coffins for them." Baxter was furious. How dare the Bronze Guild threaten the Silver? Greg said that a decision needed to be made, and maybe Lace had an ace up her sleeve that they didn't know about. The chief, in a rage, told him to call all the leaders and let them prepare for a second attack. But the guy was indignant, saying, "What about the hostages? If they attack, they will be killed." But the chief said that sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Their guild's reputation is at stake, and they must sacrifice several of their subordinates for it, and ordered to mobilize all forces. Cancel all previous tasks. Their number 1 task is to get rid of the bastards of the Lace Guild. But the executive manager was against it. He understood that it was a trap. But the head yelled at him, and he went to carry out the order. Christopher sat in the office with Darren. They saw that their account had received the proceeds from the A rank, and it was $1.3 billion. It was great to get that compensation for the cleanup team. And then Darren reported that the Special Forces investigator had arrived. He appeared yawning loudly and said that the investigation had established that it was self-defense, and that as for the culprit, further investigation was required. The investigator asked if there were any survivors. He was obliged to deliver them to the appropriate department, where they would be taken care of. But Christopher replied that everyone was dead, and there were no survivors, and the investigator left. The chief realized that if the investigation was going so fast, then someone was putting pressure on them, and it wasn't Anderson. There was no news from Anderson. He only knew that they had called a management meeting instead of holding a conference. Christopher asked how things were going with the hostages. Were they still silent? Darren said yes, and it looked like it was time to take them seriously, because all this time they were very kind to them. The hero came home, lay in bed, and thought about how to make the hostages talk. After all, whatever they did, they remained silent. While he was lying there thinking, he suddenly fell asleep. In his dream, he found himself in front of a door in a red light with bars and chains. Another room of his past life. It was the Lord of Pain, the selfish negotiator. The guild leader had already drawn him in his mind as a terrible butcher monster. It was dark in his room, and at first Christopher could not see anything, only some strange sounds, and the count of 1, 2, 3. And then suddenly a very nice guy appeared in front of him, dancing a waltz with a skeleton. He said to the hero, "Welcome," and continued his dance. The room was a mess, with overturned furniture, some jars, medical instruments, and syringes lying all over the floor. Christopher decided that this guy was definitely crazy. The guy introduced himself, said that his name was Pierre, and that the skeleton was his friend Ilias, his friend. The hero asked why he was called the Lord of Pain. He replied that when he was alive, he was the master of torture in the Empire. Christopher asked him to teach him how to torture people, but he replied that he could not teach him what he himself did not know. The hero was perplexed, as the master of torture does not know how to torture people. But Pierre told him his story. One day, God gave him this exceptional ability. He can control the suffering of others. He can cause hellish pain using various objects. But to do this, he needs to put his magical power into the enemy. And Pierre usually uses a needle for this. Christopher couldn't resist asking, so what blessing would he receive? The Lord replied that he would receive control over pain. Controlling the enemy's pain is a super ability, the hero thought, and asked how to activate it and control it. Pierre replied that first he had to prick him with a needle 3 times, and if he could endure it, he would receive a blessing. The hero asked, what if he couldn't endure it? And the Lord of Pain replied that then we would have to wait until next time. But how could one throw away such chances? And Christopher said he would try. Pierre asked if he should tie his hands and feet with a rope. The hero said that it was not necessary and ordered to start like this. The Lord of Pain said he would start on 3. 1, 2, and Christopher was pierced by hellish pain. He was all twisted up in pain that was unbearable. And then Pierre burst into loud laughter from Christopher's torment and said, 3! The hero screamed in pain. And the Lord said, as Nietzsche said, that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Pierre enjoyed watching Christopher suffer. The hero called him a crazy bastard. After all, he didn't use any needles. He asked if Christopher had enjoyed the pain, and said that now the blessing would always be with him. The hero woke up at home, he fell out of bed, and he thought that if he hadn't recovered, he would have gone crazy from his past lives. Christopher stood up, drank some water, and called the guild to find out where the hostages were. They told him they were busy in a secret house outside the city, and he doesn't have to be involved in this. The boss said he needed to check something and he'd be there soon. And he asked the head of security to guard his family well while he was away. Christopher arrived at the secret house and Darren took him to the room with the hostages. The leader approached one of them and remembered how during the attack he gave the order to retreat, and he realized that he was the leader. He asked him about it, and he said that he wouldn't tell those bastards anything. And Christopher said that in that case it would hurt him, and he activated Pierre's blessing. He mentally squeezed the criminal's heart with his hand, and he writhed in pain. Christopher squeezed harder and harder. The pain was unbearable, and the bandit moaned that he would tell him everything. If only it would all stop. The guild leader said, "Excellent," and asked his subordinates to write down his testimony and hand it over to him personally, as quickly as possible. Christopher sat in his office, analyzing the information he had received from the hostages. He asked Darren if there was any news from the Anderson Guild, but he replied that they continued to deny their guilt. And the guild leader said that he wanted to meet them in person. Darren was against it, as it was very dangerous. And is there any need for that? But Christopher said he just wanted to talk to them and put a little pressure on them. But Darren jumped up and blocked the exit from the office. He said that no one knew what Guildmaster Anderson was capable of. He would continue to deny his attack. But Christopher replied that everything was under control, and even if Anderson's entire leadership attacked him, he would be able to get away from them. He slipped under Darren's arm into the corridor and said that if the Anderson Guild was defeated, they would set an example for other guilds not to attack them. That would be perfect, and the chief said he would go there tomorrow night. Night had fallen, and Christopher was outside the Anderson Guild office. He confirmed with Darren over the phone that Baxter was indeed inside the building. The hero's shadow was watching Greg, the managing director of the Anderson Guild, and he knew for sure that he was not here. Baxter kept Greg around for his own benefit. He was convenient, but Christopher liked him because he helped his little sister in the hospital. But the Guildmaster couldn't allow himself to sympathize with anyone. Christopher had no intention of harm, but he didn't know how Baxter would react to him. He approached the guards at the entrance and told them to tell the director that the head of the Lace Guild had come to see him. The guard radioed and said he could come in. They walked him to the elevator, saying it would take him to the 5th floor, where they were waiting for him and would take him further. When the elevator doors opened, 2 armed hunters were waiting for him. Christopher asked if this was how they showed hospitality to members of other guilds. He asked why they needed weapons, but they replied that on Anderson's guild territory he had to follow their rules, and then he would stay alive. Christopher said it was stupid, and the hunters said he should know his place. After all, he started out as a simple F-rank hunter. Again, this chatter about ranks. The hero thought and decided that was enough. He activated Pierre's blessing, and the guards fell to the floor, writhing in pain. Christopher walked up to the Guildmaster's office and walked in. Baxter was standing by the window. He said that the guy was very impudent. That's because he was still a young man. And the hero suggested that he give his subordinates a lesson in ethics. Baxter invited him to sit down and have a drink, but Christopher declined, as he was not here for long conversations and empty talk. Christopher said that his house had recently been attacked. Baxter said that he knew because he had seen it on TV. The hero stood his ground and asked if he had received his message and why he hadn't responded. Baxter said he didn't know what he was talking about. Christopher asked if Anderson had anything to do with the attack. The director replied, "What if it does?" But the hero decided that he needed to retreat. After all, if he killed him right now, he would fall under suspicion. And he asked what he could do with the prisoners, whatever he wanted. And Baxter answered why he was asking him about people he didn't know. The villain said that Lace is a bronze-level guild, and they are often attacked, and you just need to know your place and not jump over your head. Christopher asked if he was threatening him, but his opponent replied that the young man was still wet on his lips. The hero smiled, and Baxter asked if he thought it was funny. But Christophe said he just wanted to remember that expression on his face, and he said that he would return in a week, and he would see if it would be as fun, and he went home. Christopher returned home. The head of security and Darren met him, asking how everything went. The hero responded as planned. All that was left was to start a war with the Anderson Guild, as planned. Several guilds were watching them, as there was a rumor that the Lace Guild had obtained a special treasure from a hidden dungeon. The head of security said they were unable to identify the bodies found in their home. This may have been done on purpose to avoid evidence, and he didn't like the investigator they sent here. Darren thought that if they controlled the Special Forces Department, the organizer must be at least a high-ranking official or the president of a large corporation. In the current situation, it is too risky to turn to the police for help, and the only option in their situation is an unofficial war. At that moment, the head of security received a call. He answered the call and said that they had a problem. 4 members of their guild were brutally murdered last night. The Special Police Department believes that it was the work of hunters and has launched an investigation. Christopher realized that they wanted to sow fear in his guild members. He decided to take action. He said that he would take care of the leaders of the Anderson Guild himself and ask them to take care of the safety of their people. The guild leader ordered the head of security to obtain photos of all the Anderson Guild's leadership and their names. He said he needed 3 hours of time, and Christopher handed him a piece of paper with the name of the hospital written on it. And he said that he needed information about this place. Meanwhile, the Shadow was watching Greg. He was in the hospital with his sister. She told her brother that this could be the key to the weakness of one of the Anderson Guild leaders, so they needed to act covertly. Under the bridge near the river stood 2 leaders from the Anderson Guild and discussed the war with the Lace Guild. One said that they would finally move up after the stagnation. Another said that today he had already killed 1 member of the Lace Guild, a D-rank hunter in his 20s. It seemed he had just woken up. The first one laughed, saying that he must have been holding back for a long time, since the order had only been given yesterday. Another said that he worked on his corpse, too, and they probably got scared and wet their pants. The first one said that they would probably move out after all, and then he was stabbed with a knife and blood splashed on his interlocutor. He fell into the water. The other one didn't understand what was happening. He didn't feel anyone's presence. Who is it? And then Christopher appeared and said that it seemed he had interrupted their cheerful conversation, and he hit the opponent. He was shocked. Where did Christopher come from? From the blow, he fell into the water. He begged for mercy because he had already killed his target, the head of the team. But Christopher said that it was he who had killed their new recruit, mercilessly. So he would do the same. The hero activated Pierre's blessing and got even with the criminal. It seems he eliminated all the leaders of the Anderson Guild, who were watching his people. They're probably in a panic now, and Guildmaster Baxter will be furious. Meanwhile, Greg and Director Audrey were sitting in Baxter's office. They were discussing how the Lace Guild had lost 4 core members and 6 new recruits, while they had lost 20 senior members. Audrey clarified that, including 5 managers and 2 executives. Baxter was outraged. How could this happen? And is there any evidence? The director replied that there was nothing left, and the department said that it was the first time they had seen such a masterful covering up of evidence. Baxter was furious that they could kill 20 people in 2 days. 7 of them were managers. He pounced on the CEO, asking what had happened, why they couldn't win, and demanded excuses. Greg replied that all forces had been mobilized for the attack, but the enemy's stealth skills were incredible. They couldn't even detect him, let alone attack him. Audrey said they even tried to set a trap at dawn, but it failed, and they were ambushed. When the hunter came to his senses, all the leaders were already dead. Baxter said that was nonsense since the hunter was A rank and his team was B rank, and they couldn't be destroyed in an instant. Greg convinced the guildmaster that they had never lost before, because everyone they had faced was weaker than them. And now they're up against someone very strong, A rank, or at worst S rank, and they're not the predator in this hunt. Audrey said the situation was getting worse and she had to do something. Baxter said she was thinking the same thing he was. We can't let ourselves be trampled any further. We must do everything possible. But Greg was shouting that they were weak, and if they fought in this situation, they would lose. But Audrey pointed out that she didn't say to remove their tops. They should focus all their efforts on the ordinary guild members, and they are ordinary people, so we can handle them. Greg countered that if they acted like terrorists, the department would step in. But Audrey said that wasn't it his job to keep them quiet. Greg said he'd do his best and left. Meanwhile, Christopher reasoned that Anderson was going to go after the guild members regardless of whether they posed a threat or not. This is a good opportunity to take advantage of a situation that could lead them to victory. There is no guarantee that they will get evidence of Anderson's guild's involvement in this matter, but if they make even one mistake by confessing everything, then he will be able to break them. They must feel cornered, And Christopher called Darren and told him about the plans of the Anderson Guild and replied that there was no need to oppose them. They have to pretend that they are doing everything they can. They just need to increase the scale of the case to involve a special police department. But at the same time, you need to protect your employees at all costs. The next day, the head of security informed Christopher that there had been an attack. 5 permanent and 8 temporary guild members were dead. The chief realized that the losses were greater than he had expected. The head of security said that if they had retreated, these losses would not have happened, and no one came from the special department. The head of the guild realized that the Andersons were simply ignoring them. The problem had to be solved as soon as possible, and he decided to call his friend Thomas. He was too loud to hear him. They hadn't talked for a long time. Thomas said he's been working hard ever since he was transferred to Investigation Section 3. Christopher asked him for a favor. The friend said that he would do anything for him, because they were friends. The hero asked if Thomas knew any famous journalists. He answered that he did, and Christopher promised him a sensation. And all the magazines were full of sensation. They wrote that there was indiscriminate terrorism against certain guilds. The police are corrupt and inactive. Dozens of people have died. And what will happen next? Darren informed Christopher that the special branch of the police had sent a search party to their location. It was hard for them to sit and do nothing after all the fuss. They sent 2 squads and a platoon, a total of 120 people. The platoon was located in the guild building, and the squads were sent to the routes and travel routes that their guild uses. Christopher said that Anderson's guild would stop attacking for a while anyway, but they still have no evidence, so they need to be obtained. And only Christopher can do it, thanks to Brown's blessing. He told Darren that he would stay home for a while, because he knew why, and the assistant agreed with him and said that he would prepare an alibi for him. Christopher used Brown's blessing and disappeared into thin air. Darren thought once again that the guild leader was simply amazing. Meanwhile, Greg ran into the office of the head of the Anderson Guild and shouted that the head really decided to use this. Baxter smiled and said that he already knew. How fast? But Greg shouted that he was the CEO, and his people were doing this. Of course he knew. And the boss promised not to use this. But Baxter replied that a lot had changed since then. And the news had made them look bad. And in general, he allows himself a lot as an executive director. The head of the guild declared that all witnesses must be destroyed. Greg asked, "And the civilians?" Baxter said that he could go and that he would not explain anything more to him. Greg said that even the guild leader couldn't get away with killing so many people. But Baxter suddenly asked how his sister was doing. He said that he does a lot for him, and accordingly he should do his job carefully. He ordered him to leave, but Greg did not calm down, and the guards took him out of the office. And he shouted that the director of the guild simply could not do this. Meanwhile, Christopher watched as representatives of the Anderson Guild dealt with the witnesses. One hunter said he was ordered to kill 20 people, but they all turned out to be weaklings. The survivors begged for mercy. The hunter hit them, ordering them to shut up, as he had been called out in the middle of the night because of weaklings like them. The witnesses said they would not say anything, that they had not seen anything, and asked not to kill them. And then the berserker showed up, and he said he was going to break the witnesses' skulls. He said he couldn't kill them quickly after he came out of the basement for the first time in a long time. Christopher saw all this and realized that these physical mutations were a side effect of the drug berserker. So Anderson's guild uses this illegal drug? That was the crucial proof he was looking for. The monster wanted to kill the witness, and Christopher rushed to help. The berserker saw him and said that the rat had come uninvited, but he had already beheaded all the victims and said that Christopher would be next. The hero asked if the Anderson Guild had drugged him. The berserker rushed at Christopher. The hero used Karsago's blessing, But this magic had no effect on the monster. Then the leader used Miller's sword, but it did not work against the mutant. Christopher fell wounded and exhausted. The berserker asked him why he had come here alone and without reinforcements, and he said that he would not kill him right away, but would first cut off his arms and legs. The hero was confused. Blessings did not work on the monster due to its physical mutations, but he needed to protect the witnesses and the guild members and family. And then Durandal appeared, and he gave his blessing to Christopher. And as long as he remains on the side of justice, Christopher will not leave him. The guild leader healed and stood up to fight. The berserker was surprised and could not understand anything. Christopher said to him, "You asked why I came alone. I'm sorry to tell you, but I have reinforcements. It's an army of 990,000 warriors." Christopher struck and destroyed the berserker. The police soon arrived. They rescued, calmed down, and questioned the surviving witnesses. Fortunately, the witnesses survived, and the Anderson Guild will soon be closed. Darren called out to Christopher and offered him coffee. But Christopher replied that he was going home, because if he stayed longer, the alibi they had worked on would be useless. The assistant wished him well and said to check the internet tomorrow. And Christopher went to wait for good news. Meanwhile, Guildmaster Anderson was furious. He called Greg and told him that this was his last chance. Doesn't he feel sorry for his little sister? Baxter wanted the CEO to bring him the head of that bastard Christopher. In the morning, Guildmaster Lace was looking at the news on the internet. They described a tragedy in the city center. Christopher was pleased. He thanked Darren for his good work. He joked that although he was a B-rank hunter, his work was SSS rank, and he said that he was capable of anything for the sake of his guildmaster. Darren said that he contacted the Special Police Department and they agreed to act. And he said that the guild's executive director, Anderson, had requested a personal meeting, and he was already waiting in the lobby. He said he would wait as long as it took, and Christopher told them to call him. Greg entered the office and said that it was a great honor for him to meet the head of the Lace Guild. Christopher said the same and applied Romanov's blessing. His real name was Honorable Assassin, and he was different from Baxter, Greedy Slaver, and seemed to be on bad terms with him. The hero decided to get straight to the point and inquired about the purpose of the visit. Greg believed that the Lace Guild had information about the Andersons. Its leader said that if they made a deal, they would give them 3 A-rank weapons and establish a relationship. Christopher said that was enough, but Greg said that he had actually come to negotiate, and he had a knife behind his back. The hero replied that it was a lie, and in fact, Baxter had helped him with his sister's treatment, and now he was holding her hostage. And he told Greg to bring him his head. Something like that? The visitor screamed, "How did Christopher know that?" But the hero replied that he saw his blade and told him to put it away, and not to be stupid anymore. And even if there was no evidence, the department would come forward in 3 days. And if they come forward, the unofficial war will have to end. And asked if Greg had counted how many of his men had died in those 3 days. And it would be hard for them to do anything because of public opinion. And Greg asked what he wanted. Christopher told him to bring as many senior hunters as he could to the guild and join him himself. He's sure a dumbass like Baxter could build a guild like that. He's sure someone else is doing his job. And he extended his hand to Greg. But he screamed that the guildmaster would definitely kill his sister. He was crazy. But the hero said that nothing would change if he just stayed there. And Christopher wasn't going to sit back, especially since he has an informant monitoring the guildmaster, and he has a maximum of 3 days left to work there. He must make a choice, either die there with most of the leadership or join them and save his loved ones. And Greg asked if he could ask to protect his sister, and he said that he was just protecting his guild Anderson, and it was he who sent the soldiers to them. And if Christopher nevertheless offers him his hand, then he agrees. and Greg left with the words, "I'll be back soon." Darren asked Christopher if this was okay, and could they trust him? Christopher said, "Of course," and he would be back soon. Meanwhile, Greg began talking to the hunters, convincing them to join the Lace Guild. They were confused, but the executive director told them that Baxter had committed crimes and had gone so far as to kill civilian witnesses. And the worst part is, he even used this. The hunters couldn't believe it. After all, Berserker was strictly prohibited by the Guild Association rules. Greg said that it was, but Berserker didn't have time to kill anyone because someone disabled him. The boys were confused as to who could defeat this monster, and Greg said that they didn't have time for chatter. The Lace Guild has evidence that the Andersons were the ones who carried out the attacks, and in 3 days, the Special Police Department will begin its invasion. And at the moment, Anderson's guild is no more protected than a regular residential building, and any other guild can take advantage of this. And at that moment, there was an explosion, and the wall collapsed. Someone had attacked the guild. Greg ordered the hunters to gather as many leaders as possible. They couldn't save everyone, but he ordered to take away those they needed. And he himself will try to delay the enemy and buy some time to escape. Greg had time to think about how he was slowly soaking through the blood, not realizing that he was drowning. And his death would be the atonement for his sins. A hunter ran into the guildmaster's office and reported that the guild was suddenly attacked. A man followed him into the office, and he told Baxter that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. But he didn't understand who it was. The man said that how could he forget, and he always remembers him when he looks in the mirror. And he said that it turns out that besides him, there are many other people who are eager to meet Baxter. And a crowd of people entered the room. Guildmaster Anderson was on his knees, begging for mercy. He was ready to ask for as much as they wanted, if only they would spare him. Greg came to the Lace Guild and brought with him 36 hunters, all that remained of Anderson's core management force. Christopher said that he knew about the attack on the Andersons by other guilds, who still held a grudge. Greg was amazed how and where Christopher knew everything, because it just happened. But the hero objected, because he told him that he had an informer. After the Anderson Guild loses its leader, it will be disbanded. So Greg is no longer in any danger. And he said, "Welcome to the Lace Guild, and you don't have to feel guilty about joining them anymore." And Christopher listed him as an ally and immediately changed the tone of the conversation. He stood up, saying that he had not slept at night trying to lure someone, and he went home. And Darren told Greg not to get his head around it, because he was still the most outstanding member of the guild. Greg said he would remember the local hierarchy and be careful. And then Darren suggested they go out on the roof for a second. The guest was scared, but went. And there Darren told the newcomer that the guild leader was a very good person. He had been through a lot, and he did not break down. He cannot pass by and not offer a hand to those suffering for the sake of their loved ones. Greg said he understood the depth of the favor that had been done for him. But Darren grabbed him by the collar of his shirt as a last resort, and he bent him down from the roof, saying that if it were his will, he would let him go down. And despite the mercy that the head showed, he wasn't happy with the situation, and if he tried to betray them or harm them, it would end badly for him. Darren let him go to the floor, and as he left, he said that he would keep a close eye on him, so he had to try hard. And he warned that they shouldn't engage in bullying on the roof, since the boss hates that. Greg sat and thought that everything would be resolved as soon as he left the Anderson Guild, but it looks like new trials are beginning. But in any case, his connection with the Anderson Guild ends here. Christopher was lying on his bed at home and pulled out his trophy dagger. Ever since he met the Andersons and faced the Berserker, this dagger had been vibrating constantly. The appraiser said that he gets stronger as he grows, and since he declared himself satisfied, It was time to reveal his new power. The hero took the dagger to another appraiser. The girl looked at it and said that it was charged with mana, which meant that it was at least an A-class weapon. But Christopher countered that at the last evaluation, he was B rank. And the girl confirmed that as he grows, he becomes stronger, and his rank increases. The appraiser showed the appraisal report and said that a new ability had been discovered. Christopher read, "Blade Control," and the dagger came to life, lit up and flew up, and the hero grabbed it. He was glad. That was more than enough. As he left the appraiser's office, his phone rang. Darren informed him that the Lace Guild had been awarded the silver rank. Details in the office. And Christopher thought, finally, and rushed to the office. Darren said that they were given this title for 2 weeks, since after the Anderson Guild was disbanded, a place became available. And in order to secure a place for them, they need to clear an A-rank dungeon. They are given a period of 2 weeks. They need to start now. Christopher said great, because he had a new ability, and he wanted to test it. Arnold told the guild leader the entire strategy and principle of clearing the dungeon and asked when the start was planned. Christopher replied 2 days later. He ran to meet Adeline. She was sitting in the park. Christopher apologized for keeping her waiting. She said that she heard from the raid group leader that they were going to clear an A-rank dungeon, and that she was also involved in this takeover. Christopher asked her what she was worried about. Adelina replied that she was. They were always outsiders in the shelter. They were humiliated, and maybe because of this, she continues to think about the bad. But at the same time, she thought that if she overcomes this, what kind of happiness awaits her later? And since they are now doing things they never even dreamed of before, despite the excitement and fear, she will be able to overcome all of this. Adeline ruffled Christopher's hair and said that they absolutely had to do this. The hero came home and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He couldn't get rid of the thought of how the girl had ruffled his hair and why she had done it. It was so unusual. He tried to switch. He needed to think about how to reach the silver level, about becoming stronger. His 990,000 lives supported his rapid growth and development. Romanov thought that the hero had grown up enough. Carsago and Miller said they could no longer treat him like a child. But even if he were told about the real purpose, wouldn't it be meaningless if he himself didn't intervene? Purr said that since they were just outside support, he would like to ignore this desire. And when this person appears, won't it be the beginning of their flourishing road? Miller said it was too late. This guy had just appeared. He was one of those who defied fate. Deus. He showed up earlier than they expected. He was supposed to show up that day anyway, and now it was all in Christopher's hands. Miller approached Brown and asked him not to use vicious means more than was necessary for Christopher. Although he said he was preparing for that day, Miller was not thrilled with his methods. Neither Brown nor Durandal will be able to stop Christopher as long as he is strong enough. Brown asked if Estelle could handle the situation. They were talking about the Red Wizard. With Christopher's current strength, even if he learns this magic, he won't be able to use it properly. Brown told Miller that when that day came, they would have to become more brutal to win the war. There were already so many correct reincarnations, but what was the result? Miller replied, "Let him not worry. Everything is fine with Christopher." The hero once again went to meet his past life in his dream. This time, it was Deus, the absolute will, representing 990 past lives. He was here to check one thing before interfering with his destiny. Christopher asked what he wanted to test. Deus replied, something that might give a tiny bit of hope before the absolute despair that was to come. The hero thought he would have to pay for the power of past lives that he gained so quickly, but it would be ultimate despair. Deus said they were coming. Who? He couldn't say now, but Christopher wouldn't have a chance to survive this disaster without a blessing. If he gets the blessing, he will have a small chance of winning, but on the other hand, they will know about his existence. And they will send S-rank fighters, which he will have a hard time dealing with. And if he doesn't get it, the fighters won't come. But the day of reckoning will definitely come. Nobody knows when this will happen. And if Christopher escapes, he will buy himself some time. The hero asked if he would become stronger with his blessing. Deus replied that he would, and his strength would not compare to what he had now. And Christopher asked for a blessing. And from now on, the absolute will of Deus intervened in his fate. He got a chance to win, but they learned of his existence. And something from space saw that a suitable one had appeared on Earth. It was interesting. Sometime later, Christopher was watching the news. All the channels were talking about the disappearance of low-level hunters. He and Adelina were thinking about how to strengthen the guild's defense system, since it had not yet reached a high level. Then Darren burst into the office, shouting the good news that Lace would finally be officially promoted to silver level. He thought he would not live to see this day and cried with joy. Christopher noted that it was all thanks to Darren, and he did a great job. The assistant reported that now, due to the promotion, Padalga, near the city of Sunyon, had been designated as their special raid zone. Of all the places, there was the most competition. But the raid administration requested their presence. Most likely, the gates opened there. The administration had called a meeting, and they had already contacted the other guilds. It was time for them to leave. And Christopher wondered if this was the chance Deus had referred to. Darren and Christopher arrived at the meeting in Soignon, which was held by the leader of the second watchtower team, David. He said that the raid was urgent and difficult. Difficulty A rank. Representatives of other guilds were present at the meeting. David said that for the Lace Guild, raids will be different from other guilds. Monsters will appear from suddenly opened gates. The detection system will notice this and report it. Vice Guildmaster of the Great Demon Guild. Erica countered that the Lace Guild was also sent to their special zone. But David said that the Lace Guild had the appropriate qualifications since it had been promoted to silver level. And then Erica asked if Lace would exercise her priority rights. Christopher replied that of course, since they were granted these rights quite fairly. Erica said that in that case, their guild would not use their priorities, and they would see what the Lace Guild was capable of. In that case, the other guilds made the same statement, supporting the Great Demons Guild. But David yelled at Erica that she was going to play with people's lives. But she replied that she was not going to block the raid. And if the kids with big dreams, who just came out of bronze, want to know what a raid is, they won't interfere with them, and they won't claim their priority rights. And Christopher said that then he would use their exclusive rights, and use Romanov's blessing. Erica's real name is Greedy Alley. She screamed that he needed to know his place and keep his mouth shut. And if he was so tactless, she might get angry. Christopher told Erica not to talk to him in that tone and with such a superior tone, and he looked into her eyes. She fell silent. Something had scared her, but she couldn't figure out what it was. And David said that if that was the case, then the Lace Guild would have exclusive rights. The meeting participants dispersed, and Erica thought that she would take advantage of the situation and put Christopher in his place. She would show him what happens when you disrespect a gold-level guild. David stopped Christopher and asked if he was sure he would go ahead. The hero replied that if the other guilds were behind, it did not mean there would be a disaster, and convinced the observer that they could do it. David agreed, since the second awakened hunters always achieved what seemed impossible. Of all the guilds in Padalaga, the Great Demon Guild was the only one with gold rank. They always held their position. Christopher didn't know who was behind them, but the other gold guilds weren't interfering. David said he had a bad feeling about this, and these people's actions were pretty suspicious. The hero asked why he decided to overthrow the Great Demons Guild. The observer replied that he had no choice since the opportunity arose. And if the Great Demons Guild falls during the raid, then Lace will have to compensate for all the damages. And due to the attention of the Great Demon Guild, they have no way to support or help Lace. Christopher convinced David that everything would be fine and left. Greg was waiting for him at the exit. He asked if the exclusive right was the plan of the head that he had been hatching for so long. After all, this is an A-rank raid, and there are not many hunters who are able to participate in such a thing. Christopher understood everything and said that he had an ace up his sleeve, and this raid would definitely be successful. Deus' revelation has come upon him. Accepting the consequences, he takes upon himself the fate of submitting to the predetermination of fate. Christopher called Dylan, the leader of the popular raiding team Ace, and he invited him to a meeting. He offered him to join their guild. Dylan guessed that Lace had received priority, and therefore wanted to enlist support from raid teams. But the hero objected that they had put forward an exclusive chance, not a priority. Dylan was impressed, and he asked what the other guilds were going to sit and watch. But Christopher replied that he only knew that the gate would be closed, and his team would get a lot of interesting things. Following Deus's revelation, he created a bond that could change his destiny. This bond will connect you to a person who will prevent absolute despair. And Dylan asked how much the Laces were willing to give them. Christopher said 20%, and he agreed. They shook hands. And now it was time for the raid. Everyone gathered near the place where the gates were to open. Dylan was there and said that the rank hunters would arrive as soon as the gates opened. He suggested that Christopher quit his job as a guild master and join them to raid dungeons. The leader refused. He applied Romanov's blessing and saw Dylan's true name, a believer in justice. Christopher gave the briefing. He told Adelina to try to keep the earpiece during the fight. The first group would go first. He and Darren will be in it. And if the girl stops receiving an answer from them, then it's time to retreat. The gate opened. The first group went inside. There was a thick fog. Christopher said to protect your eyes. It was magic that obscured visibility. Brown's insidious laughter warned the hero of danger. And then monsters attacked him from behind. Living armor without magic won't be able to handle them. The monsters should have gathered deep inside the gate, not attacked from behind. Hunter Rogers said he would take the front flank, and the leader would guard Adelina. But Christopher said they would attack together. He activated Miller's sword and charged. Roger was wounded and asked for healing. Adelina activated the Holy Shield, and they saw the center of the gate. Darren asked how the others were. They were all fine. It was easier to attack since the monsters were gathered around them. They decided to close the gate and get out before it disappeared. And then Adelina suddenly felt a surge of mana. The monsters attacked them again. They were resurrected. And then someone said, "Hi!" It was Erica. She asked if Christopher remembered her and said she had been dying to see him again. Christopher asked about the purpose of her visit. After all, Lace had exclusive rights to this raid. But Erica asked if he thought she was here because of the raid. She came to punish him for his disrespectful behavior in the administration. Erica demanded revenge and always got her way. Adelina told Christopher to be careful, but he replied that according to his information, Erica was awakened, which specializes in support, and its combat capabilities should not be too high. Brown's sly warning hovered close to his ear. She wanted to kill them, just because they were using an exclusive right. Christopher radioed the rest of the guild to retreat, since the situation in the heart of the gate was not too good. And he said that they should not go inside no matter what. He ordered them to stay outside. The team began to fight off the monsters, but Erica revived them and strengthened them with her magic. They killed the monsters, but they revived again and became stronger and stronger. Roger told the leader that they could not deal with the monsters while they were dealing with her. The armor's mana only increased. The battle was on. Darren said it would be dangerous if this continued. And Christopher gave him an important task. Whatever happens, protect Adelina with all his might. And he promised that he would protect her no matter what. The hero knew he was losing consciousness. Erica told him that this is what happens when you don't know your place. He should have stayed in the bronze-level guild. Why get into trouble and let it come to this? Christopher realized that he had been too naive and too arrogant. And then he heard a voice. The will of Danzig is with you. As long as the one you need to protect is near, you will not lose. Christopher activated the blade and realized that he needed to hit Erica with one blow using the blade's aura. Darren was injured. He fell to the floor and groaned that he needed to be protected, as ordered by the guild master. Erica said that it happens that people develop special abilities, and in her case, it is the ability to control monsters. So there is a chance to have fun like that. But that's where the jokes ended. Erica decided to kill him, and the others will think he died in the center of the gate during the raid. After all, they are just amateurs who don't know their place. And then suddenly, a wall of flame appeared. Erica didn't understand what it was. But at that moment, a girl appeared. She said that she had heard about Erica's bad reputation, but not to this extent. And I asked the team if they were okay. I noticed that they looked pretty good, and what a relief that they were still breathing. It was Gina. She said that after learning about the use of the exclusive right, she came to watch the battle. But she saw that the hunters retreated and did not enter. No one understood what had happened. And then Gina noticed a familiar flow of mana coming from within. Following the flow, she came here, and she said that it would be sad if the person she came to watch died. And she turned to Adelina, telling the healer to protect these two, so that they would not burn by accident. Erica called everyone insolent bastards and called for backup. But Jean turned her fire on the monsters. And she told Erica what to do now, since all her dolls had burned. But she replied that now it was her turn to show off. Gina asked if she had seen S-rank hunter magic with her own eyes, which could be used using an abnormal amount of mana. Adelina was afraid that at this rate they would be consumed by the flames. Jean began to attack, and the healers screamed and tried to stop them, afraid that her shield would not withstand so much. But Jean summoned hellfire. Christopher came to in a hospital bed. He remembered that he had passed out after Gina had arrived. Adelina was sitting next to his bed. He was glad that she was okay and alive and well. Then the head of security entered the room. He asked how the chief was feeling, because he had been unconscious for almost a week. Christopher asked what was wrong with Darren, who replied that the assistant was badly hurt, he had serious injuries, but he was halfway to recovery. Deputy Manager Greg is currently serving as the manager, and he said not to worry, because all important issues were resolved through him personally. Christopher calmed down and wanted to visit Darren. They left quietly so as not to wake the sleeping Adelina. Christopher went into the room to see his assistant, but then Romanov's voice was heard, that he shouldn't get up and should lie back down before the Emperor gets angry. Darren apologized that he was the first to fall in battle, and he had no excuse. Christopher said he was touched by his dedication and ability to follow orders. Then the hero found out that they were in the hospital of the jail corporation. Now it turns out that he failed and was in debt to the jail group. And I thought, I wonder what move Jean will make next. And then there was a knock on the door, and Christopher heard a familiar voice saying that it was impolite to talk about people behind their backs. It was Rachel. She came with Kevin to check on the wounded. The hero thanked her for her help. He said that if she had not helped him, they could all have died. Rachel replied that she had come simply to watch Lace's first raid. She had helped because the situation demanded it, although it would be nice if he moved to the jail corporation, but Christopher said that he had an offer, and we need to discuss it. He said he had a lot of enemies. Kevin called it natural, since he was always sticking his nose into other people's business. Rachel asked if he wanted to clean them out by teaming up with Jail. But Christopher said he wanted Jail to act as his shield. The girl replied that it was risky, and why would they need it? What benefit would Jail get from it? To which Christopher replied that he should consider it as building a relationship with a future SS rank hunter. Rachel was shocked and asked what the hell he said. Yes, he advanced from F rank to A rank in half a year. That's good, but for a reawakened person, it's nothing special. Yes, reawakened ones are very rare to meet, but they do not have such unreasonable demands as Christopher. The hero asked if she would believe him if he rose to S rank at the next re-evaluation. Rachel thought she was dealing with a moron. There are requirements for revaluation. Christopher replied that the requirements can be bypassed if you have monstrous strength, and if he had her, Jail would help him. The girl said she wasn't going to help him, but the guy said they wouldn't have a choice. Rachel asked him if he was living a second life, if he was acting so self-confident. Christopher replied that it was not his second, but his 100th. Then the girl said that he should first prove that he can do it, and then they will talk about investing. And she said to call when he is ready, handing him a business card. The hero asked what happened to Erica. Rachel replied that he knew how she was famous for her best fire magic. She didn't want to break the growing shoot, but she had been under so much stress from work lately. Christopher thought that since she was calling Erica an escape, she was implying that her potential was only growing and had prospects. Rachel continued by saying that she was human too and could make a mistake. She failed to control the flames and close the gates to Erica while she was still alive. Kevin said if luck was on her moan, she was still alive. If not, she could have died because of the spatial rift. And he said that this secret should remain between them. They left. The head of security said it was likely that Erica had no planned raids and was acting on her own initiative. So most likely the Great Demons Guild will think that she suddenly disappeared. And no one will know as long as they keep it a secret. Christopher began to doubt whether he was asking the right person for help, and what if he suddenly disappeared if he didn't live up to Rachel's expectations? Darren said that by show what he can do, Rachel probably meant a duel. Christopher asked, who would the opponent be? And the assistant replied that she would, since their guild has no official status and they do not have many hunters. Then the boss said that he had only two options. Either he showed Rachel what he was capable of, or he would also disappear without a trace into some hole. She seemed very ambitious to the hero, and if he showed her what he was worth, she would definitely invest in him. Christopher was sure that he would not lose anyway, and at all costs, he needs to prove himself. Meanwhile, Rachel told Kevin to invite Christopher to the training ground. Choose her day off as the date. Christopher heard a voice. Deus interfered with your destiny. Every time you challenge destiny, there is a chance to meet another. Meanwhile, the Great Demon Guild was discussing the current situation. The hunters learned that the Lace Guild had received tens of millions of won in compensation for the exclusive rights. They were outraged that they had been robbed. If it weren't for that idiot Christopher, the money would have been theirs. Although Erica got into trouble herself and gave up her guild rights, and now she herself has disappeared somewhere. Apparently, she is ashamed, and she is hiding somewhere. But then Erica's older brother Richard came in, and said that his sister would soon be found, and then she would hang the heads of the members of the Blade Guild in the main square of the city. The hunter asked what brought Richard to them. He replied that he wanted to take advantage of it and placed a strange mana crystal on the table. At the same time, Dylan came to the Lace Guild office. He once again praised the guild leader and asked Christopher why he wanted to see him. The leader handed him a check, saying that it was his share of the raid. The check was for 570,000 won. The raid team leader was delighted. That amount for one raid? He started admiring Christopher again and dragged him out for a drink and a rest. The hero resisted, saying he would go home. But it was no use, and Dylan forced him to go and rest. They sat at the bar, chatted cheerfully, and were about to go home when Christopher heard a voice. Brown's wicked laugh warns of danger. Someone nearby is plotting something bad. And they saw a monster walking down the street of the city. It asked the high priest for another chance. Christopher said that judging by its mana, it was about A rank, and it was a man. But Dylan objected, how could this creature be called a man? The monster said that he had to sacrifice a guardian of order for the ceremony. Christopher and Dylan thought about it and decided that it would be better to get out of here quietly. But suddenly, they noticed a mana crystal on the ground, but its color was unusual, black, and Christopher heard voices. Gilbert, a madman who has reached the truth, shows great interest in the unusual substance. Deus turns the wheel of fate. Brown sighs at your discovery. Miller wishes you luck with your predestined despair. In fact, all the past lives were experiencing and supporting him. Christopher offered to return to the guild office. Dylan said he would be honored. Christopher held the black mana crystal and realized that despair had set in. It was all very serious if the past lives had reacted to the find like that. Time was running out. I needed to get stronger as quickly as possible. In the morning, he met Rachel. She came to pick him up by car, and she was surprised what kind of guild leader he was if he didn't have a driver's license. Christopher said it was because he simply didn't have time. He got into the car, and Rachel said it was time to test his abilities as an S-rank hunter. She brought him to her own training area. Christopher couldn't believe she was training in such a huge space alone. Rachel replied that it was one of the privileges of being the planning director of the jail guild and an S-rank hunter. She said that he would have to wait a long time to get the chance to take the S-class hunter exam. But if he fights her for 30 minutes on equal terms, she will help him arrange it. But if the hero doesn't hold out, all their previous agreements will lose their force. Christopher said that she underestimates him, and Rachel said that the chairman kept telling her that the world is a battlefield. Only those who can survive to the end will be considered worthy people. And it's good that those who are priceless die. And to prove her worth and for jail's sake, she trained and honed her power. So don't you dare underestimate this position. Now he had to prove his worth. And the duel began. Rachel used various skills. Christopher tried to resist with all his might, but he couldn't. She was too fast. The hero knew he had screwed up and was about to die. Rachel used fire breath. Christopher blocked Karsago's shield. Not only did she have talent, she also had her own refined technique, and she understood what and when could be used profitably. And Christopher realized that she had trained long and hard. To win this battle, he awakened the killer instinct of the sleeping reaper and activated Brown's blessing. Christopher disappeared. Rachel did not sense his presence. She realized that he was using the stealth skill and admired his skill, and she said that strength is not in skill, but in the ability to use it. And she determined where he was and struck. But only his jacket was in that place. Nice move. The hero activated Miller's sword and tried to strike. But then he realized and admitted that he had underestimated Rachel. She was incredible and hard to defeat. And Christopher decided to use the blessing of Karsago. Hundreds of spears rushed towards the victim. But the girl activated fire dust, which is when dust particles burn and affect everything around them. Rachel said he was using cowardly tactics, but Christopher replied that he would use any tactics, even cowardly ones, to achieve his goal. Time was up. The fire extinguisher was turned on. A security guard with an umbrella ran up to the girl. Rachel thanked Christopher for the lecture and said that she would keep his advice in her heart, even though they would no longer have a reason to meet. She was amazed that he could still stand on his feet after such attacks. The hero said that until recently, He was one of those whom she called a useless person. But now, he stands on the battlefield on two legs. The ability to persistently go to the goal, despite all the obstacles and adversity on the way. This is the value that he proved today. Rachel ordered the medics and said he was really interesting. Christopher passed out. He found himself in an unknown place. He was wearing armor. The hero found himself in the guise of Brown. The invader approached him. Brown wanted to destroy him, saying that he was considered a risk factor by the command. But the invader replied that the universe was vast, and no matter how many people like him he destroys, they still manage to crawl out. This is annoying, and that is why he must die. Christopher woke up at home in bed. He didn't understand what kind of dream it was. Maybe it was Brown's memories? The invader? The qualifier? What did that mean? The same suspicious mana crystal lay on the nightstand nearby. The next day, Christopher went to the S-rank committee. Rachel went with him. He didn't know she was coming too. But the girl said that the commission is very strict about assigning S-rank. For them, it's like a nail in the ass. And although his magical abilities meet the requirements, he does not have the recommended dungeon level. That is why Rachel goes with him. And if he gets confused or flustered in front of the judges, her reputation will suffer. Christopher objected that he was also the head of the guild. But the girl said that they couldn't know what the commission would throw out. Rachel and Christopher went to the commission, and the head of security and Kevin were ordered to wait for them near the car. As they walked, Rachel said that Christopher had to be extremely careful and cautious. She was once reprimanded by an examiner for having curly hair. Although this has nothing to do with her rank, they were met by the same examiner. He greeted them and said that he would be determining Christopher's rank today. He led them into the room. To begin, Christopher was told to place his hand on the sphere and use mana to measure his magical power. The hero put his hand up, he was in great shape and thought how far he could go, and then he heard a voice. Gilder, a maniac who sought the truth, became interested in him. He offered to destroy the sphere so that the examiner would become interested in him. Christopher thought, how can he destroy it? But Rachel whispered angrily to him to stop hesitating. Christopher gathered himself and used his power to the fullest. The sphere broke. The examiner ran up in horror to see what had happened and how it could have broken. Christopher replied that they had probably been using it for a very long time or incorrectly. The examiner said no, and it was designed to withstand the energy of an SSS rank hunter. And Rachel asked if there was even one SSS rank hunter in the country. It turned out that there wasn't. The examiner cried over the sphere, saying it was a very expensive item. Rachel said she would compensate them for the cost, and she held out a suitcase containing 150 million won. And since they had taken care of this, they should take their leave and go to the exit. The examiner said that they should take care of passing the levels of sufficient rank on their own. But Rachel said, does he really want the fact that the equipment was being handled in bad faith to come to light? They walked out of the building and Christopher asked if the exam was that easy. Rachel replied that it was because they were very busy people. As they walked to the car, Christopher's phone vibrated very loudly in his pocket. He thought it was strange because he hadn't set it to vibrate. The hero reached into his pocket to get it, but it wasn't a phone, it was a mana crystal. Rachel saw it and screamed, "Where did he get that thing?" And Christopher asked if she knew what it was. A moment later, they were already with the head of the S-rank Special Investigations Department. The mana crystal was lying on the table. They called it a black mana stone. The chief had orders to immediately report to the higher authorities when black mana stones were found. This was not distributed and was classified information. Christopher used Romanov's gift and saw his true name, Righteous Agent, and Rachel's name, Addicted to Twisted Affection. The girl understood that it didn't matter where this stone came from. In any case, they were in the same boat, and it would be impossible to get out of it. Christopher asked if it had anything to do with Jail's group, but Rachel deflected the question. The head of the Special Investigations Unit said it wasn't a fake. This stone is exactly the same as the one found earlier, and he said that something happened to those who kept this stone. They either died or became incapacitated. Everyone who had it with them, without exception. They called Dylan. He showed up shouting that the boss should call him right away, but Christopher said he'd only just found out. They had to tell everything as it happened on that crazy Friday. They told how they saw a creature that crumbled into dust, and in its place there was a stone of black mana. Rachel and the investigator realized that the description matched the previous incident exactly. So they asked the hunters if they had been attacked before. They didn't understand what they meant. And then the emergency alert went off. All personnel to prepare for a possible attack. The head of the Special Investigations Department said to get ready. They would be here in the blink of an eye. That's how it always happened. Christopher was outraged. Why wasn't this mentioned in the news? He was told that it was an information blockade. Rachel said that the current state of the country is not as good as he thinks. Something was approaching, and Rachel activated the fire shield. It was approaching. It looked like a normal person. It said that Christopher was not alone. They are the ones who have given up humanity, and they will not be able to face them, the ones the creature has chosen, because they are special. The man turned into a panther-like monster and began to tear apart the fiery shield. And he reached Christopher. The liquid from his skin fell on the hero's hand. The head of the department said that she was poisoned and that close combat should be avoided. Christopher was indignant. How could he avoid close combat if even the blade control did not work on him? Rachel's shield was already at its limit. How did it find them? And then Rachel screamed at them to stop counting crows and do something. The shield was about to collapse. Christopher asked the head of the department if they had ever caught one. He said no, and the hero told Rachel that he would prove his worth right then and there. And the essence of the Reaper awakened. Living beings could not escape the instinctive fear, and Christopher rushed at the monster. The Panther Man said that the qualifier was very persistent, and the hero told him not to wait, but to attack. And the monster released huge, long tentacles. The department head shouted that it was a wind cutter, but Christopher activated Miller's sword and easily dealt with them. The department head was shocked. And this man was F rank a couple of months ago? He asked the hero not to hurt the monster too much, since they needed to take a sample. The Panther Man said that the qualifier had grown considerably, but urged him not to get cocky. For the bishop's sake, he would. And he groaned, asking the bishop to give him another chance. And then there was a light, a flash, and S-class magic began to spread. It was some kind of mind control attack. They had headaches, they couldn't understand what was happening, and they all fell to the floor unconscious. Deuce's absolute will intervened. Christopher found himself at another door of past lives. He lay there and realized what had happened to him, and realized that Rachel wasn't telling him something about the Black Mana Stone, why it was a qualifier, and who was a bishop. He stood up and opened the doors. He entered. It was a room, either a sorcerer or an alchemist. His past life came out to him, saying that his name was Gilder, and he watched the hero. Christopher replied that then he knew what situation he was in, and Gilder said that he knew that the boy had become addicted to magic with the help of the Black Mana Stone. He himself had suffered because of him many times, and Christopher asked to explain what was going on. Gilder said that he could not tell him everything, because there was a ban. He only said that this was task number 1, and they were all obliged to carry it out, even at the cost of their lives. They were all connected, and Christopher was on probation. And since Deus asked him, he will lend his power. Since Christopher is under the influence of the Black Mana Stone, He will die sooner or later, like everyone around him. But if he, the qualifier, passes his test, then he will give him his blessing. And Gilder reached for the books. He took a huge stack of books from the shelves and gave them to Christopher, saying that he had to pass an exam, a test, and learn all the information. Because Gilder was previously a very famous professor and wouldn't even sit at the table with someone who was dumber than him, he sat Christopher down with the books and said that if he could learn them all, he would share with him how to get rid of the influence of the Black Mana Stone and how to dispel magic. Christopher thought torture was better. He read, studied, cursed, and finally solved the task. Gilder looked at it and said it was not bad. He did 100%. And so, when he wakes up, all the knowledge of the magic circles will be transferred to him. And Gilder will be very much looking forward to when they meet again. Christopher woke up. The analysis of the magic circle began. But he was still poisoned. He was getting weaker, and he realized that if this continued, he would die. He urgently needed to activate the blessing to get rid of the black mana. The magic circle was activated right in his heart. He didn't know it was so painful to dispel black mana. But Christopher did it. He looked around and realized there were only 3 people left. He had to do it. Meanwhile, Rachel found herself in a dark place. She couldn't see anything and couldn't understand what was wrong with her. There was no one around. She thought it was just like when she was a child, when her father demanded achievements from her, and she felt completely useless and thought she should die. It was Christopher who healed her. He activated the magic circle right in her heart and healed her from the black mana. Dylan and the Chief of Special Investigations were standing nearby. They were already healed and okay. And then Rachel came to her senses. She woke up. She came back with tears streaming from her eyes, and she thanked Christopher for saving her. Sometime later, they were all sitting in the office of the head of the Special Investigations Department. The head of the department thanked them for their good work and said that he would now report everything in detail to his superiors.